unaware, she inherited 10 billion. After her hidden trillionaire mom died, husband abandons his wife pregnant with twins to marry his wealthy boss. What happened at the will reading later left him shaking. He didn't leave her quietly. He didn't even leave her like a husband. He left her like a man trying to prove a point right there at a family and company gathering with guests watching and phones already raised, while his pregnant wife stood near the doorway still holding her medical bag. Derek Combs took the microphone meant for a toast, looked past Lillian like she wasn't even human, and said loud enough for the whole room to hear, "I'm filing for divorce. Effective immediately, she's a liability." The room tilted into silence. Someone gasped. Someone else started recording. No one stopped him. At the edge of the crowd, Lillian Foster, 29, 8 months pregnant, with twins, kept one hand pressed over her stomach like she could shield 2 tiny lives from the humiliation crashing down on her. Her face stayed calm, but her eyes betrayed the shock. She wore a simple dress, no jewelry, nothing that hinted at anything powerful. To them, she was just Derek's soft wife, the woman who didn't understand pressure, the one they whispered was a burden. And standing beside Derek was Marissa Conway, his wealthy boss, the woman he'd soon quietly marry, perfect hair, perfect smile, hand resting on his back like she'd already moved into Lillian's place. Nearby, Derek's mother watched with approval, as if this public destruction was overdue. What none of them understood, what even Lillian didn't understand, was what her mother's death had already set in motion days earlier, a legal machine moving quietly in the background. A will, a trust, a sealed letter meant for Lillian, a number so huge it didn't sound real. In private finance circles, people had once joked that Josephine was the $1 trillion ghost because the investment structures she quietly controlled moved money measured in trillions. Even though her personal estate, carefully ring-fenced, sat at only $10 billion. But the letter that should have told Lillian everything never reached her hands, because someone inside that house had intercepted it. And, unknown to them, someone outside that house, an investigator Josephine had arranged in advance, was already watching, camera ready, from a dark sedan across the street. So while Derek was busy calling her dead weight and turning her pain into a public show, a different truth was racing toward them, one that would end in a silent room full of lawyers, a will reading, and a sentence that would make Derek's hands start to shake. This isn't just a story about a husband choosing a wealthy boss over his pregnant wife. It's about what happens when a man throws away a woman he never truly understood, right before the world finds out who she really is. Dear viewers, thank you for being here. If you watch without subscribing, it's like standing in that crowd while Lillian is erased. When you click that button, you stand with every woman who was mocked, abandoned, and still found a way to rise. Please subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. The call hit like a punch to the chest. Lillian Foster, 29, 8 months pregnant with twins, froze with her hand on a tiny onesie. The fabric stretched between her fingers like it might tear if she breathed wrong. The voice on the phone was polite, trained, too calm for what it was saying. "Miss Foster, I'm so sorry. This is Dr. Shu from Street Bridget's. Your mother, Josephine Conley. She passed away early this morning." For a second, the room didn't feel real. The walls looked too steady. The air looked too normal. Lillian's stomach tightened, twins shifting, as if they felt her shock before she could name it. She tried to stand, but her knees didn't trust her. She lowered herself to the edge of the bed, eyes fixed on the open drawer of baby clothes, as if folding and sorting could keep life from changing. Josephine was gone. Not sick. Not getting better slowly. Gone. Lillian pressed the phone to her ear, said thank you, because people said thank you on the phone, even when their world had just cracked. The line went quiet, and she sat there staring at her own reflection in the dark screen. She thought of calling her husband right away. Of course she did. That's what wives did, wasn't it? They reached for the person they trusted most. So she went to find Derek Combs. Derek was 33, tall, sharp-featured, always dressed like he was being watched. He worked under a powerful executive, his boss, Marissa Conway, a wealthy woman with a reputation for turning people into stepping stones. Derek wanted her approval the way some men wanted oxygen. When Lillian walked into the living room, Derek was already halfway inside his phone, thumb moving fast, face tight with focus. He didn't notice her tears at first. "My mom," she said. The words came out small. My mom passed away. Derek blinked once, like he'd heard a noise he didn't understand. Then he exhaled, slow and impatient, not openly cruel, not yet. But the impatience was there, like a warning sign. Lillian, now, he said, eyes dropping back to the screen. I have a lot going on. The quarter review is next week. Marissa needs these numbers. A lot going on. That's what he called his life these days. She waited for the hug, the hand on her shoulder, the simple, human thing. He gave her none of it. Are you sure? He asked, not in concern, more like he wanted the news to be incorrect so it wouldn't interrupt his day. Lillian nodded. She could feel the twins shifting again, her body reacting to stress with a dull ache that spread across her lower back. Derek didn't see it, or he saw it and chose not to. Okay, he said quickly. We'll deal with it. Call whoever you need to call. I can't miss this call with Marissa. Deal with it. That phrase had become his favorite tool. Like her grief was a package he didn't want to touch. Lillian swallowed, because she didn't want to beg for softness. She had learned long ago that begging only made proud people colder. So she nodded like she was fine, because she was good at that. Lillian hadn't grown up dreaming of money. She hadn't grown up even knowing what real money looked like. Josephine Conley raised her in modest rentals, with second-hand furniture that was always clean and books that were always newer than their clothes. Josephine never wore flashy jewelry. Never talked about success like other parents did. She talked about choices, about safety, about privacy. When Lillian was a teenager, she once asked why they moved houses so often and why her mother never used the same bank twice. Josephine had paused while stirring a pot on the stove, eyes distant like she was listening to a memory. People love you for what they think you need, Josephine said, voice soft but firm. And they resent you for what they think you have. Lillian didn't understand then. She only understood that her mother kept locked drawers and private mail and a calm face that never fully opened. Sometimes, late at night, Josephine would sit at the table with stacks of paper, legal-looking forms, crisp envelopes, signatures. When Lillian walked in, Josephine would slide the papers under a cookbook like it was the most normal thing in the world. Just grown-up stuff, she'd say. Once, Lillian caught a glimpse of a name on a document, Foster Global Trust, and asked if it belonged to family. Josephine smiled like she was hiding a secret inside her teeth. A long story, she said. One you don't need to carry yet. That was Josephine's way. She believed freedom was quiet and safety was silence. What Lillian never knew, couldn't have known, was that Josephine's grown-up stuff wasn't small. Behind Josephine's plain life was a web of private trusts, silent partnerships, and holdings hidden behind legal walls so strong most people didn't even know they existed. Josephine didn't run around calling herself a trillionaire. But the funds and portfolios she had influence over through Foster Global Trust and other vehicles controlled money measured in trillions. People in certain boardrooms called her the trillion-dollar ghost. Her personal estate, though, had been deliberately capped and structured, $10 billion, locked behind conditions and protections. Josephine didn't want a daughter who expected power. She wanted a daughter who deserved it, so she kept Lillian unaware on purpose. And Lillian, trusting her mother, never pushed. She married Derek because he seemed hungry for life, and she believed hunger meant ambition, not danger. She supported his dreams. She made herself smaller when his ego needed space. She told herself love was patience, love was compromise, love was staying. Now she sat on the edge of her bed with Josephine gone, realizing her mother had been her only true protection, whether she understood it or not. Lillian went back to the nursery corner, no fancy theme, no expensive decor, just clean shelves and neatly stacked diapers. She picked up the tiny onesie again and folded it with steady hands that didn't match the shaking inside her chest. She planned which drawer would hold which twin, because if she stopped moving, she might fall apart. Her body ached in that deep, private way pregnancy creates. Every breath felt like work. She didn't complain. She never did. Derek once joked to his friends that she was low maintenance, and they laughed like it was a compliment. He never understood that Lillian had simply learned how to carry weight without asking for applause. She believed marriage was built quietly. She believed loyalty was a daily choice. She believed love didn't need witnesses. Derek moved through the house like a man already gone, checking his phone, adjusting his watch, glancing at his reflection in the window like he was practicing being important. Lillian watched him and felt a strange distance growing, like the space between two people who used to share one life. She mentioned her mother again later, voice softer. I should go through her things, she said. I don't even know where she kept her papers. Derek gave a short sigh. You and your small-town nostalgia, he muttered, half smiling like her grief was a habit that annoyed him. Just do what you have to do. I have a company event coming up. It's important. Marissa's expecting results. An event. Important. Lillian didn't ask who would be there. She didn't ask why his phone never left his hand. She didn't ask why his patience kept shrinking. Because she wanted peace. Because she thought peace could save love. On a shelf in Lillian's bedroom sat a small, outdated phone, never charged properly, never thrown away. It had been Josephine's. Years ago, Josephine had pressed it into her hand. Keep this charged, just in case, she'd said. If there's ever something important about me that you need to know, they'll call this number. Lillian had meant to plug it in. Life got busy. She upgraded her own phone. The old one became a sentimental object instead of the emergency line Josephine wanted it to be. Once, Lillian tried to give it to Derek to recycle. He laughed. Why keep junk? Lillian kept it anyway. She didn't know why. She only knew it felt wrong to let it go. That night, Lillian finally fell asleep with one hand resting over her stomach, as if she could shield the twins from the world simply by touching them. Derek lay beside her, awake. His phone lit up. A message appeared from Marissa Conway, his wealthy boss, the woman whose approval he chased like a lifeline. It read, "We need to talk about your wife." Derek's face tightened. His thumb hovered over the screen. And somewhere, in the quiet machinery of Josephine's hidden life, the first sealed letter from her estate had already been sent out, headed toward the marital address Lillian still thought was safe. The first thing Lillian noticed was Derek's grip, not on her hand, on his phone. He held it like a secret, thumb hovering, eyes darting down whenever it buzzed. And when Lillian asked, softly, if he was okay, Derek's smile came too quickly, too clean. He said he was fine, but his voice carried that thin edge that meant don't ask again, because something had shifted after that message last night. We need to talk about your wife. Lillian didn't know the name attached to it. She didn't know the tone of power behind it. She only knew Derek had gone quiet in a way that felt planned. That evening, he dressed like a man walking into a new life. This is important, he told her while adjusting his jacket in the mirror. It's a company fundraiser and networking night. Appearances matter. Just don't embarrass me, okay? Don't embarrass him. Lillian's face stayed calm, but inside something pressed against her ribs. She was pregnant with twins, carrying 2 heartbeats and still being spoken to like a risk. But she nodded anyway, because her whole life had trained her to keep peace even when it cost her dignity. She chose a simple dress, clean, soft, comfortable. No glitter, no loudness. She wasn't trying to compete. She wasn't trying to be seen. She only wanted to stand beside her husband and feel like they were still a team. But the moment they walked in, Lillian understood. This room was not built for teams. It was built for winners. People wore confidence like perfume. Laughter was practiced. Smiles were weapons. Cameras were everywhere, small ones, phone ones, hidden ones angled the way they always angled, toward status. And right there, in the center of it, was Marissa Conway. Marissa Conway was 38, Derek's boss, and the kind of wealthy executive who didn't need to brag because the room already bragged for her. She had the calm posture of someone who'd never been told no in a way that mattered. Her role wasn't just boss. She controlled Derek's career path, his promotions, his reputation, his hunger. And Derek, starving for validation, treated her approval like it was proof he was finally becoming someone. Marissa never rushed. She didn't need to. She stood exactly where cameras naturally angled toward her, champagne glass untouched, face composed. Power didn't shout from her, it settled, heavy and quiet, as if it owned the air. When Derek arrived with Lillian, Marissa's eyes flicked to Lillian the way people check labels. First, the dress simple, clean, no designer logo begging to be admired. Then Lillian's body pregnant, heavy with twins, moving slower. Marissa's smile didn't widen. It sharpened. Marissa greeted Derek first. "Derek," she said warmly. Professionally, like a woman offering him a future. Her hand touched his arm, just a half second too long. Derek straightened as if her fingers had plugged him into electricity. Then Marissa turned to Lillian. Her eyes traveled over Lillian's face with a pleasant, assessing look, like Lillian was a resume someone had already decided not to read. "So this is her," Marissa said. Not a question, not curiosity, a conclusion. Lillian offered her hand because that was what decent people did. Marissa looked at the hand and let a beat of silence pass, just long enough for the message to land. Then Marissa's gaze slipped to the chair beside Derek, Lillian's chair. And Marissa sat there. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't loud, it was surgical. For a fraction of a second, Derek hesitated. Lillian saw it, the twitch of uncertainty, the flicker of should I, before ambition crushed it. Derek let it happen. He didn't offer Lillian his seat. He didn't say, "That's my wife's place." He simply turned toward Marissa, smiling like he'd been chosen. Lillian stood. A few people noticed. A few people pretended not to. Someone whispered to someone else. Phones angled slightly upward, screens glowing, ready to capture humiliation like entertainment. Lillian felt heat rise into her face, but she kept her posture steady. She could do steady. She had done steady her whole life. Marissa leaned toward Derek and said something low, something that made him laugh. Lillian didn't hear the words, but she heard the meaning. "You don't belong where power sits." Conversations moved like rivers around Lillian. People spoke over her, around her, through her, like she was glass. When she tried to add a small comment, something polite, safe, Derek cut her off with a tight smile. "You wouldn't understand this part," he said, voice carrying just enough to sting. It wasn't a shout. It didn't need to be. It was the kind of humiliation that made people question if they were imagining it. Marissa watched, enjoyed. Her eyes held Lillian the way hunters hold prey. Calm, patient, certain. Later, as executives discussed budgets and streamlining, Marissa casually dropped words like audits and cash flow with the ease of a woman who knew how to make numbers sound like morality. "Sometimes," Marissa said, "liabilities disguise themselves as loyalty." Her eyes landed on Lillian's stomach when she said it. Lillian's hand instinctively pressed to her belly, protective. Two small kicks answered, like the twins were reminding her she wasn't alone. Derek didn't notice. Or he noticed and didn't care. Dinner was announced. People flowed toward tables with assigned seats. Lillian assumed she'd be guided to sit beside her husband. But a young assistant approached with a polite smile that wasn't really polite. "Ma'am," she said softly, "could you stand here for a moment? We're adjusting seating for senior staff and partners. Stand here, not asked positioned." Lillian looked toward Derek. Surely he would speak up now. Surely he would say, "That's my wife." Derek didn't even turn. Marissa did. Marissa's gaze said everything Derek wouldn't. "See? Even he knows where you belong." Lillian stood with the assistants while plates were placed for everyone else. She watched laughter spill across tables, watched Derek lean toward Marissa, watched the space beside him remain empty like a statement. No one defended her. Silence became complicity. Later, Marissa raised her glass. The room quieted. Phones lifted slightly. Attention gathered around her like gravity. "To clarity," Marissa said, "to efficiency, and to the courage to let go of what no longer serves growth." People murmured approval. Smiles. Clinks of glass. Marissa's eyes never left Lillian. Derek clapped first. Lillian didn't. Her fingers curled at her side, steady on the outside, trembling underneath. It wasn't just jealousy she felt. It was recognition. Recognition of something her mother once warned her about, how certain people could look at you and decide you were disposable. As the night ended, Derek walked ahead of Lillian, already absorbed in conversation, already moving like she wasn't attached to him. Marissa drifted close, passing Lillian with the scent of expensive confidence. She brushed by as if it was an accident, then murmured almost kindly, almost like advice, "Motherhood makes women smaller. You'll see." Lillian's breath caught. Not fear, recognition. Because in that moment she understood. Marissa wasn't just flirting with Derek. Marissa was studying Lillian, planning around her. And Derek, her husband, was letting it happen. When they got home, Derek didn't ask if Lillian was okay. He went straight to his phone. Lillian stood in the doorway, watching him type with the urgency of a man protecting something precious. Then she saw the screen light up again. Marissa's name. Another message. Short, cold. A command, not a conversation. Tomorrow, I'll come by the house. We'll handle this properly. Derek's jaw tightened, and for the first time, he looked at Lillian not like a wife, but like a problem he had to solve. And somewhere deep in Lillian's memory, her mother's voice rose like a warning she had ignored for too long. People resent you for what they think you have. Lillian didn't know it yet, but the next day would not be about work. It would be about erasing her. And as she turned off the bedroom light, she noticed Derek had locked his phone with a new password, like he was preparing for a war she didn't even know had begun. The papers were already waiting for her, spread across the kitchen table like a verdict. Lillian stepped in and stopped so hard her breath caught. For one sharp second, her mind refused to name what she was seeing. Printed, statements, highlighted lines, a folder stamped with the company logo, and Marissa Conway standing in her home like she owned the walls. Marissa, 38. Derek's wealthy boss leaned against the counter with calm eyes and perfect posture, as if she had simply walked into the wrong house and decided to stay. She held a slim tablet at her side, expression smooth, mouth relaxed, no guilt, no apology, just control. And next to the papers sat Karen Mullen, Derek's mother, early 60s, sharp-faced, dressed like she was attending a courtroom. Karen wasn't a visitor in this marriage. She was a judge who believed she had the right to sentence people. Derek paced behind them, phone in hand, jaw tight. He didn't look at Lillian the way a husband looks at a wife. He looked at her like she was a problem that had finally become official. Lillian's twins shifted, a slow roll inside her stomach. Her body knew something was wrong before her mind could catch up. "What is this?" she asked, voice thin but steady. No one answered her directly, because the accusations didn't arrive as questions. They arrived as conclusions. Karen tapped a page with one fingernail, lips pressed in a kind of moral satisfaction. "She's been siphoning money," Karen said, like she was reading out loud from a script she had rehearsed. "Small amounts from the joint account, enough to hide, enough to make Derek look irresponsible at work." Lillian stared at the page. Her name was printed there, her address, numbers that looked like they belonged to her life. But the account number didn't. The pattern didn't. The transfer descriptions didn't sound like anything she'd done. Her throat tightened. She tried to speak, to ask Derek to look closely, to use his own eyes for once. But Derek's gaze slid past her and landed on Marissa, like her approval mattered more than truth. "You said HR flagged this," Derek said to Marissa, voice low and urgent. Marissa gave a small nod, almost bored. "I said finance flagged irregular personal transfers that create exposure," she corrected smoothly. "I brought you the internal template so you'd understand the seriousness. If this escalates, HR will have to get involved." She said it like it was official, like she was doing them a favor by handling it informally at their kitchen table. Lillian's skin went cold. Marissa wasn't just here as a woman. She was here wrapped in the language of a system, spreadsheets, logos, internal review, exposure. And in Derek's mind, that meant she had the right to define reality. Lillian took a careful step forward. "This isn't..." Karen cut her off without even looking at her. "Stop. Don't embarrass yourself." "Embarrass yourself?" Lillian blinked, stunned by how quickly the room had turned into a place where her voice didn't count. Derek finally turned to her, eyes sharp with something worse than anger, disgust, as if believing she could defend herself was offensive. "I carried you," he said. "You were nothing before me. You don't even understand how accounts work, and now look." The words landed like a slap even though his hand didn't move. Lillian felt her face heat, then go numb. Nothing before him? She wanted to laugh because she had been a whole person before she ever met Derek, but she didn't laugh. She couldn't. Her throat was full. Marissa watched, arms folded now, expression composed. She looked almost satisfied, as if this was the moment she had been arranging since the fundraiser, quietly, carefully, like a chess player moving pieces into place. Lillian reached toward the papers, needing to hold them, to prove to herself she wasn't imagining the wrongness. Derek knocked the stack from the table with a sharp sweep of his hand. Pages fluttered to the floor like wounded birds. "Don't touch," he snapped. "You'll contaminate them. We need them as evidence." Contaminate, like she was dirty, like she was the crime. Lillian's hands froze in the air. She felt every eye on her, Karen's cold stare, Marissa's calm gaze, Derek's anger. Even the kitchen itself felt like it had taken sides. Karen stood and moved closer, voice lowering into something that pretended to be concern. Pregnancy makes women unstable, she said, as if she was warning Derek about a dangerous animal. We warned him. We. Lillian's heart thumped hard. We warned him. As if this had been discussed. As if this moment had been planned between them, somewhere behind her back, while she was folding baby clothes and believing in marriage. Marissa nodded one small, silent agreement. Lillian slowly crouched to pick up the fallen pages. Her back protested, twins pressing low, but she forced herself to move carefully. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of panic. As she gathered the papers, her eyes caught something small. A formatting error, a tiny detail most people wouldn't notice. The spacing of the header, the way the audit summary aligned with the margins. Lillian had seen that exact template before on Derek's laptop when he worked late on the department documents he left open. That template came from Marissa's department, not from a neutral HR system. Lillian didn't say it out loud. Not yet. The air wasn't safe for truth right now. Truth would be shouted down. So she memorized it. The way the font sat, the way the highlight color looked, the way the internal review language was written. If she survived this moment, she would need every detail. Derek's voice rose again. I trusted you, he said, too loud, too performative. He wanted this to be a scene where he looked righteous. And this is what you do? While I'm working? While I'm trying to build a future? Lillian looked up at him from the floor, papers in her hands. A future? He said it like she wasn't carrying it inside her body. Marissa stepped closer, heels quiet on the tile, and spoke in a voice designed to sound reasonable. Derek, she said gently, like she was calming a child. We'll do this properly. Documentation, process, boundaries. You can't have someone creating this kind of instability at home. Boundaries. Lillian's stomach tightened. The twins kicked harder now, restless. She breathed through it, refusing to show pain. Karen's mouth curled. She's a burden, she said, not caring anymore. Always has been. Derek didn't argue. That was the loudest part. Lillian stood slowly, one hand braced on the table. Her eyes moved from Karen to Marissa to Derek. She wanted to ask, when did you decide I was the enemy? But she already knew the answer. They had decided the moment she became vulnerable. That night, after the house finally went quiet, Lillian sat alone with her phone in her hands. Derek had gone into the bedroom without speaking to her, like he had already filed her under resolved. Lillian tried to check the joint account just to breathe, just to reassure herself that she could still buy diapers, still buy medicine, still protect the twins if Derek kept escalating. The screen loaded. Then one line appeared. Account closed by authorized user. Her chest went hollow. Before she could move, her phone buzzed again, an unknown number this time. One message, no name. It's over. Don't make this harder. The wording was Derek's. The lack of name was deliberate. Lillian stared at the words until they blurred. And somewhere behind the silence of the house, she heard Derek's voice in the hallway, low and urgent, as if speaking to someone who mattered more than she did. Tomorrow it sounded like they planned to make this official in front of people. The microphone squealed, sharp and ugly, and the whole room flinched. Lillian Foster froze mid-step, her breath catching like she'd been pushed underwater. Her heart slammed once, hard, as Derek Combs lifted the mic that was supposed to be used for a toast. The crowd went quiet the way crowds do when they sense blood in the water, phones already half raised, eyes bright with the thrill of witnessing someone else's life collapse. They called it a celebration dinner, part family gathering, part work event. Derek's colleagues, Marissa's circle, a few relatives. Enough people to make humiliation feel official. Derek stood tall, shoulders squared, wearing the face of a man who believed he was finally in control. He didn't glance at Lillian first. He looked straight ahead, like she wasn't even part of the conversation. I'm filing for divorce, he said, effective immediately. A pause, gasps, a few nervous laughs that died quickly when no one joined in. Lillian's stomach tightened, twins shifting low, reacting to the shock moving through her body. She felt the room tilt, like the floor had been built on lies and someone had just kicked the support beams out. Derek's voice grew louder, more confident, like he was feeding off the silence. She's a liability, financially, emotionally, professionally. I can't let her drag me down anymore. Liability, not wife, not mother of his children. Liability. and right beside him stood Marissa Conway, his wealthy boss, the woman who had been physically present in every step of this unraveling. Marissa's hand rested on Derek's back, not quite an embrace, more like ownership. Her smile was small, controlled, satisfied. Behind them sat Karen Mullen, lips curled in approval as if she'd been waiting for this announcement the way some people wait for dessert. Lillian's ears rang. Her mind reached for logic. This can't be happening like this. Not here, not in front of everyone. But Derek was doing it here because that was the point. Public humiliation wasn't a mistake for him. It was a display. Lillian took a step forward. She didn't want to fight. She wanted to understand. She wanted to say, "I'm carrying your children." She wanted to say, "You don't have to do this." But before she could even open her mouth, two security guards moved into her path. Event security, not personal bodyguards, just men in matching polo shirts hired for safety that evening. Faces blank the way faces get when they're paid to obey. One of them lifted a hand slightly, not touching her, just blocking her like a wall. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "you need to step back." Mr. Combs asked that speeches not be interrupted. "Step back." Lillian looked past him at Derek. Her eyes begged without asking. Derek didn't move. That was when she understood the cruelest thing. Orders had already been given. This wasn't a decision made in the moment. This was arranged, coordinated, planned. A burst of laughter erupted from someone near the back, too loud, too uncomfortable. Then whispers, then the hum of recording devices. The crowd had turned into an audience. Karen's voice floated from her seat, sweet and sharp at the same time. "Don't cause a scene, Lillian," she said, as if Derek wasn't the one holding a microphone like a weapon. Marissa leaned toward Derek and murmured something. Lillian couldn't hear the words, but Derek's face tightened with satisfaction. He was being guided like a puppet that thought it was a king. Lillian tried again to move forward. Security shifted with her. Marissa didn't look away. She didn't need to. She knew Lillian had nowhere to go inside that room. Then Derek lowered the microphone and spoke without it, voice still loud enough to carry. "You're done," he said, eyes cold. "You're not embarrassing me anymore." Embarrassing him. Lillian's throat burned. She forced a breath in slowly, trying to keep her twins calm. Her hands trembled at her sides, but she didn't raise them. She refused to look desperate in front of people who were hungry for it. That's when the first suitcase landed outside, a heavy thud. Then another. Someone had opened the front door. Someone had gone upstairs. Someone had grabbed Lillian's things like they were trash and thrown them onto the lawn. The sound of the suitcases hitting the ground was strangely loud, final, like punctuation. Lillian's legs moved before her mind caught up. She turned and walked toward the door, not fast, not panicked, because she couldn't afford to fall. Not like this. Not pregnant, not in front of them. Outside, the air felt colder than it should have. Her suitcases sat on the grass like evidence she didn't belong inside anymore. And there, near the doorway, stood Marissa, wearing Lillian's robe. Not a similar robe. Not a new one. Lillian recognized the small loose thread at the sleeve she had sewn it herself 2 weeks ago while Derek was on a work call. At some point, while Lillian had been kept at the doorway by security, Marissa had slipped upstairs, changed, and walked back out like the house already belonged to her. Marissa adjusted the robe belt slowly, eyes glittering with calm cruelty. "So this is where we'll live?" she said lightly, looking around as if the house had already changed owners. Lillian stared. For a second, her mind went blank, not because she was weak, but because the boldness of it was unreal. This wasn't just betrayal. This was replacement. Marissa wasn't stealing a man quietly. She was stepping into Lillian's life and trying it on like a dress. Behind her, people stepped outside to watch neighbors, guests, corporate allies with nice shoes and curious faces. Some pretended to be concerned. Some didn't bother pretending. Phones were up now. Fully up. The humiliation wasn't accidental. It was being documented. Lillian's medical bag was still inside. The one with her prenatal records, her vitamins, the emergency numbers her doctor insisted she keep. Her hand went to her stomach again, twins rolling, unsettled. "I need my bag," she said, voice trembling now despite her effort. "My medical bag." Derek walked out behind Marissa like he belonged to her shadow. He looked at Lillian as if she was asking for luxury instead of basic care. "What now?" he snapped. "You always overreact." "Overreact." Lillian's eyes widened. "I'm pregnant," she said, the words coming out sharper than she meant. "With your children." Derek's mouth tightened. He stepped closer, and his hands shot out, grabbing her arm hard enough to make her gasp. "You're not my problem anymore," he said through his teeth. Lillian tried to pull back. Pain flashed through her arm, then down her side. She clutched her belly instinctively. The slap came fast, a sharp crack that echoed through the yard. Lillian's head turned with the force of it. For a second, she saw stars. Then silence. Total silence. No one screamed. No one moved. No one stepped forward. Phones kept recording. One woman near the back flinched and half-stepped forward, but Karen's hand closed around her wrist and pulled her back with a quiet, "It's domestic. Don't interfere." Marissa didn't flinch. She simply watched, eyes steady, as if this was a lesson being taught in public. Karen's voice drifted from the doorway, pleased and calm. "She brought this on herself," she said, like she was describing a mess on the floor. Lillian's cheek burned. Tears filled her eyes, but she refused to let them fall in front of them. She tasted metal blood from where she'd bitten the inside of her mouth. She looked at Derek one last time, waiting for something: regret, hesitation, a flicker of humanity. There was nothing. That was the moment her heart stopped trying to save the marriage. She bent down slowly, barefoot in the grass, lifting one suitcase at a time. Every movement hurt. Her belly felt heavy, low, dangerous. But she kept moving because stopping meant collapsing. A car engine hummed softly across the street. Lillian's gaze lifted. A black sedan idled there, parked just far enough to be unnoticed by most people. Inside, someone sat very still, watching the scene like it mattered. Lillian didn't recognize the face through the glass, but the feeling that hit her was immediate and strange, like she was being observed by someone who knew more about her life than she did. Someone connected, somehow, to Josephine's careful, hidden world. The man in the sedan lifted his phone not to gossip, but to record. Angles steady and professional, as if following instructions. And as Lillian slid into her car, shaking, she didn't see Marissa's satisfied smile fade for the first time. Just for a second, like Marissa had noticed the sedan too, and didn't like it. Somewhere, a sealed estate letter addressed to Lillian had already been delivered to this house and signed for by another hand, and someone inside was ready to make sure she never touched it. The envelope felt heavier than paper should. Marissa Conway held it between two fingers like it might stain her skin, standing alone by the living room fireplace as the house finally emptied of guests and noise. The robe tied around her waist. Lillian's robe still carried the faint smell of laundry soap and something softer, something domestic. Marissa ignored that. She ignored everything that wasn't useful. The envelope was thick, sealed, official, the kind of mail that didn't come often. It had arrived earlier that afternoon by courier, while Lillian was getting ready upstairs and Derek was out front pretending to manage caterers. The doorbell had rung. Marissa had opened it like it was already her house. She had signed the electronic pad with a practiced flourish. The courier hadn't questioned her. Now, hours later, she turned the envelope over under the lamplight. On the front, printed neatly in black ink, was to Miss Lillian Foster Ray. Estate of the late Josephine Conley. Marissa's eyes narrowed. Derek had said Lillian's mother was simple, small town, nothing special. Derek had said it like a fact, like he'd lived the woman's life himself. But Marissa had learned long ago that men like Derek repeated whatever made them feel superior. They didn't verify. They didn't investigate. They just believed what fed their ego. Marissa ran a fingernail over the seal. She didn't need a knife. She didn't need permission. She had walked into Lillian's home like she belonged. She had watched Derek slap a pregnant woman in public and felt no fear. That meant the house was already hers, at least in Derek's mind. So she opened the envelope. Her eyes moved quickly over the first page, scanning for numbers, for names, for anything that explained why the paper looked so expensive, why the language felt so careful. Then her breath paused. Not a gasp, Marissa didn't gasp, but something inside her tightened, sharp and unfamiliar. There were words she recognized immediately: trust, executor, beneficiary. And there was another name, printed like the center of the universe: Lillian Foster. Marissa's mouth went dry. For half a second she stood completely still, listening to the quiet of the house. Derek was in another room, on the phone again, probably enjoying the feeling of being free, probably believing he had just upgraded his life. Marissa didn't share his excitement. Excitement was for people who didn't understand risk. She read faster. The letter wasn't a full breakdown, not yet. It was a notification. A formal notice that the law firm representing the Foster Global Trust had attempted contact. That Josephine Conley's estate process was moving forward. That the intended recipient, Lillian Foster, needed to respond in order to unlock further instructions. Marissa's eyes flicked down and caught the law firm name at the bottom. Not a small neighborhood office. Not the kind of place that handled ordinary wills. A serious firm with an international reputation. The kind of firm that served clients whose money quietly shaped markets. Marissa's thoughts sharpened, cold and quick. What if Josephine Conley wasn't who Derek said she was? What if Lillian wasn't who he thought she was? And what happens if Lillian finds out, after what we just did to her? She glanced toward the hallway. Derek would ruin this if he knew. Derek would panic. Derek would talk too much. Derek would make calls, beg, expose himself. And if Lillian had something bigger behind her, Derek's begging could bring attention. Attention was dangerous. Marissa stared at the letter again, then at the fire. The fire was already burning, slow and steady, throwing orange light across the walls like it didn't care what it consumed. Marissa hesitated only 1 second, then she fed the pages into the flames. The paper curled, blackened, cracked. If that's real, she murmured, voice low, almost calm. She'll never find out. Ash lifted into the air. A small part of her watched the fire with something close to satisfaction, not because she enjoyed cruelty, but because she enjoyed control. Knowledge was power. And taking knowledge away from someone else, that was the cleanest kind of power there was. Behind her, the floor creaked. Marissa turned. Derek stood there, loosening his tie, looking pleased with himself like he had just won a competition. What's that? He asked, nodding at the flames. Marissa's expression didn't change. Junk mail, she said smoothly. Probably sympathy letters from some law office. You know how people get after someone dies. Derek shrugged, like it didn't matter. Good. I don't want her getting emotional again. We need this clean. Emotional again. Marissa studied him for a beat, this man who had slapped his pregnant wife and called her a liability, then complained about her feelings as if they were an inconvenience. He was useful. But he was also weak, and weak men were easy to replace. Lillian sat in her car with her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold her keys. Her cheek throbbed where Derek had hit her. Her arm ached where he'd grabbed her. The twins pressed low, as if trying to hide inside her. She didn't drive yet. She couldn't, because the silence after public humiliation was louder than the humiliation itself. It left room for thoughts to attack. How did he become this? Or was he always this, and I just refused to see it? Lillian wiped her face with the back of her hand and stared at the house she'd believed was home. Then she remembered Josephine's old phone. The outdated phone Lillian had kept for years on a bedroom shelf, the one Derek called junk. She'd grabbed it instinctively when she packed in panic, like her hands knew it mattered even when her mind didn't. Lillian dug through her bag until she felt it cool and dead at the bottom. She pressed the power button. Nothing. She plugged it into the car charger, waited, pressed again, whispering, "Come on, please." The screen blinked. Then, slowly, it lit up. A single voicemail notification appeared, one unheard message. Lillian's breath caught. The timestamp made her stomach drop days ago, right after her mother went into the hospital. Her thumb hovered. The timestamp made her stomach drop days ago, right after her mother went into the hospital, from a law firm. Lillian stared at the screen as if it might explain itself. Why would a law firm call this number? Why would they leave a message weeks ago? Why didn't I know? Her thumb moved to press play. The screen froze. The phone went still in her hand. Lillian's pulse pounded in her ears, loud enough to drown out everything else. She hit the button again. Nothing. Just that frozen screen, that trapped message. Like the truth was right there, and something time, neglect, or someone else's interference had already started trying to keep it from her. Across the street, the black sedan idled quietly. And as Lillian stared at the frozen voicemail, she didn't see the shadow inside the car lift a phone of their own, not to gossip, but to report, in a low voice. that the subject has left the house. Escalation confirmed. Somewhere, the next message from that law firm was already being queued, and Lillian was about to learn how fast lies can become official when you don't know what you're entitled to. The voicemail finally played like a door cracking open, then slamming the whole world into place. Lillian had to wait for it. She was still in the driver's seat, the old phone warm in her palm, battery just alive enough now. Earlier, when she tried to listen, the screen had frozen and left the message trapped. Now, with the phone finally awake, that old message from the law firm began to play. She pressed play. The voice on the recording was calm, professional, the kind of calm that felt almost cruel when your life was falling apart. This message is for Miss Lillian Foster. My name is Mr. Bennett Swanson. I'm calling from the law firm representing the estate of Josephine Conley. Lillian's throat tightened. Estate. Representing. The word sounded like a language meant for other people. The message continued. We've activated the estate process in line with Miss Conley's instructions. We've attempted to reach you on file several times. A sealed notification letter has been delivered to your marital address and signed for. It's important you contact us as soon as possible to acknowledge receipt and discuss next steps as beneficiary. Again, this is Bennett Swanson calling. Beneficiary. The word hung in the air like a foreign object. Lillian didn't cry. She didn't scream. She didn't even move. She sat in her car, phone pressed to her ear long after the message ended, listening to the silence where truth had been waiting for weeks while she was being pushed out of her own life like trash. Her cheeks still throbbed. Her arms still ached. The twins shifted inside her as if they were restless, as if they could feel their mother's body turning cold with understanding. Someone had taken her mail. Someone had made sure she stayed unaware. And suddenly, the fireplace, the robe, Marissa inside the house, the junk mail, the way Derek let everything happen. It lined up too neatly to be coincidence. Lillian stared at the dark windshield. Her mother's voice floated up from memory, soft and warning. Freedom is quiet. And Lillian realized something that made her stomach drop again. Josephine hadn't just lived quietly. Josephine had prepared quietly. Prepared for exactly this kind of cruelty. Lillian reached up and wiped her face once, more from habit than emotion. Her eyes were dry, but her breathing was sharp. Every breath felt like it had to fight its way through shock. She glanced at the old phone, the outdated one. Josephine once told her to keep charged, just in case someone important needed to reach you about me. Lillian didn't understand how much her mother had hidden. Not yet. But she understood this. If a lawyer was calling her beneficiary and talking about sealed letters, then Josephine's small life had been a lie meant to protect her. And Marissa Conway had just burned a part of that protection to ash. Lillian's hands tightened on the steering wheel. She could either collapse under this, or she could learn how to move like her mother moved. Quiet, careful, unseen until it was too late. She didn't drive to a shelter. She didn't drive to a friend's couch. She drove to an address Josephine once gave her on a small card, years ago, tucked inside a plain envelope. Josephine had said, "Only if you ever need it." Lillian had laughed then, a little. Need what? Josephine's eyes had stayed serious. Need to be believed. The office building wasn't flashy. No glass sculptures, no marble fountains. Just 4 floors of brick and a simple plaque by the entrance. Newman Legal Group. Lillian's stomach clenched as she stepped out. The twins made her feel heavy, slow. Her body wanted rest. Her mind refused it. Inside, the waiting room smelled like paper and clean air. Not warmth, not comfort, just professionalism. A woman looked up from behind the front desk. Then she truly looked, eyes narrowing the way people's eyes do when they recognize a face they were expecting. She stood immediately, face changing from neutral to focused. Lillian, the woman said softly, like she already knew her. Sandra Newman was in her early 40s, a family and estate protection lawyer. She didn't have the fake sweetness of people who pretended to care. She had the controlled calm of someone who dealt with betrayal for a living. Josephine had trusted her. That alone made her different. Sandra's role wasn't just legal paperwork, she was a strategic anchor, the person who could turn pain into a plan. Sandra came around the desk and took in the whole picture fast. Bruised cheek, swelling around the arm, pregnancy strain, the way Lillian held herself like a person trying not to fall apart. I wondered how long it would take, Sandra said gently. Your mother was very specific. Lillian's throat tightened. My mom, she started. Sandra held up a hand not to silence her, but to steady her. I know, Sandra said. Let's sit. If you start feeling dizzy, we pause and call your OB. No heroics. That practical concern loosened something in Lillian's chest. For the first time that day, someone was treating her like a human being, not a problem or a prop. They moved into a private office. Sandra offered water, tissues, a seat with armrests. Lillian sat, hands resting over her belly. She didn't talk like a dramatic victim. She spoke in facts, because facts were safer than feelings right now. She told Sandra about the fundraiser, the chair, the standing with assistants, the audit papers in the kitchen, Derek's mother, the slap, the suitcases thrown out, the frozen voicemail, the mention of a sealed letter signed for by someone else. Sandra's eyes didn't widen. She didn't gasp. She simply listened, and the stillness in her face told Lillian something powerful. This wasn't unbelievable here. This was recognizable. When Lillian finished, Sandra leaned back and said quietly, Okay. We move clean. We move once. Your mother knew these people were capable of this. That's why we're here. That sentence felt like oxygen. Sandra tapped her desk phone. Antonio, she said. I need you in my office. Antonio Sampson was a private investigator in his late 30s, the kind of man who spoke softly because he didn't need volume. His role was proof, real proof, not gossip, not feelings, evidence that could stand up in court and in public. He arrived within the hour, carrying a slim folder and a camera bag. When Lillian saw him, something clicked. He had the same calm stillness as the man in the sedan. I've already been watching the house, he said, voice low, eyes sharp. Your mother asked me to be on standby once she updated her will. She didn't want to interfere in your marriage, but she didn't trust your husband's ambition. On standby, Lillian's pulse jumped. Her mother really had prepared. Antonio spread photographs across the table, Marissa entering the house. Marissa taking mail from the courier. Marissa leaving with a stack of letters. Marissa standing by the fireplace, paper in her hand, flames reflecting in the glass. Lillian's breath caught again. She could almost smell the imagined smoke, could almost hear Marissa's quiet voice from earlier. If that's real, she'll never find out. Sandra didn't react emotionally. She reacted strategically. We'll need financial proof too, she said. Renee. Renee Gilbert was a forensic accountant in her mid-30s, precise and quick, with eyes that looked like they could read lies off paper. Her role was numbers tracking transfers, templates, timestamps, and digital footprints, turning manipulation into undeniable evidence. She joined them that same afternoon via secure video, then in person 2 days later, laptop open, already inside a web of statements and logs. The audit file accusing Lillian of siphoning money, Renee said. That template is a copy from Conway Strategic Finance, not HR. Metadata shows it was created on a workstation in Marissa Conway's division, then exported and printed. The timing lines up with Derek's recent complaints. Lillian's fingers curled. She'd noticed the template mismatch earlier, but hearing it confirmed made her feel something new. Not hope, power. Sandra slid a stack of papers toward Lillian. Divorce papers. Not dramatic, not revenge-fueled, clean, controlled. This is step one, Sandra said. We file. We ask for protective orders. We put the joint assets and the babies under court protection. Then we coordinate with the estate lawyers. Your mother's trust team will be fully involved now that there's evidence of interference with estate correspondence. Lillian stared at the papers. Derek had tried to erase her. Now she was signing herself into a new reality. Her hand trembled slightly as she picked up the pen. Then she steadied it. For the first time since the expulsion, Lillian's voice came out firm. They wanted me silent, she said. Let's show them what they missed. Sandra nodded once. Antonio gathered the photographs. Renee saved the files. The room wasn't full of pity. It was full of quiet weapons. Antonio paused at the door, hand on the knob, as if debating whether to say the next part. There's something else, he said. Lillian looked up, pen still in her fingers. Yesterday, Antonio said, your husband tried accessing trust records linked to your mother's name and your maiden name. The attempt got flagged. That's how Mr. Swanson's firm realized things were escalating. Trust records. That meant Derek wasn't just leaving her, he was hunting. Lillian's mouth tightened into something almost calm. He doesn't know what he's touching, she said softly. As she said it, her own phone buzzed, a new notification from an unknown number, short and chilling. Soon, this ends. The wording was Derek's, even if the name wasn't there. Sandra glanced at the screen, then at Lillian. It ends, Sandra said, but not the way he thinks. Somewhere, Derek was already planning to make his version of the story official before the will reading and the trust lawyers could make his actions official in a different way. The first email hit the screen like a gunshot. Several long days passed between the night Lillian signed the divorce papers and the next time she sat across from Renee and Sandra in that same office. Days filled with medical checks, rest, and careful paperwork. Sandra insisted on it. No war, if your blood pressure is spiking. By the time Lillian came back, the swelling on her cheek had faded, but the memory hadn't. Renee's laptop chimed one small sound, huge meaning, and Sandra leaned in while Lillian held her breath, hands pressed over her belly as if she could keep the twins calm by sheer will. The message wasn't a rumor. It wasn't a guess. It was a clean, cold trail of words. From Marissa Conway to Derek Combs, subject, make her look unstable. Renee clicked it open. Lillian's stomach tightened. The twins kicked like they felt the danger in the air. For a second, she tasted the same metal she tasted the day Derek slapped her. Not because it was happening again, but because she could finally see it had been planned. The emailed text was short, strategic, used the language we discussed: concern, unpredictable, emotional strain on your career. Frame this as you trying to protect the company and your future. HR responds better to instability than to conflict. Renee scrolled. More messages. Marissa telling Derek exactly what to say, exactly when to say it, how to turn a pregnant wife into a liability without sounding like a monster. Don't call her crazy. Say you're worried about her judgment. Remind them she's been asking questions about money. Make that sound impulsive, like she doesn't understand stress. If you involve security, emphasize safety and tension at home, not anger. It'll give you cover later. Marissa's language was polished, corporate, almost gentle. Use concern, use process, use HR, use documentation. Sandra's face stayed calm, but her eyes sharpened. This is coaching, she said quietly. Not an affair accident. This is orchestration. She weaponized corporate systems and your husband's ego. Lillian stared at the screen. She didn't cry. The tears had dried up somewhere around the time she realized she couldn't beg for dignity anymore. What she felt now was worse than sadness. She felt rewritten. They had been writing a story about her while she was living inside it. The investigation had moved faster than Derek ever imagined because it didn't start from scratch. Josephine Conley had set pieces in motion long before anyone understood why. Once Antonio handed his footage to Mr. Swanson's estate team, the trust lawyers filed emergency motions. The company's legal department received preservation notices and subpoenas. Compliance officers who had once listened politely to Marissa now had to turn over logs, backups, audit trails. Antonio placed a flash drive on Sandra's desk. Security footage from the house and the street, he said. Date stamped. Chain of custody documented. Renee plugged it in. Video loaded. There was Marissa, inside Lillian's home, moving through the hallway like she had a key. There was Marissa, stopping at the door to sign for a courier envelope. There was Marissa entering with letters in her hand. There was Marissa at the fireplace, her body blocking the camera for a second, then stepping aside while paper curled in the flames. Lillian's throat tightened. She could almost smell the smoke again, could almost hear her own heartbeat from that night on the lawn. Sandra didn't let the moment linger too long. Emotion was important. Strategy needed oxygen too. We don't react, Sandra said. We build. Renee clicked open bank records next. Numbers moved across the screen like a language of betrayal. Joint funds rerouted. Not once, not twice. Repeated transfers small enough to hide, frequent enough to bleed a family dry. Payment descriptions disguised as consulting, event support, executive hospitality. Renee pointed at one line and said, that account belongs to a holding company Marissa controls. The transfers line up with dates Derek took her to private dinners and company trips he told you were mandatory. Lillian's mind flashed to the canceled cards, The "you're overreacting" arguments. The way Derek acted like she was demanding too much when she just wanted groceries to clear. Now she understood. They had needed her to look guilty so no one would question the cruelty. Sandra began building the folder, digital and physical. Hard copies, metadata, chain of custody statements. Every document stamped and organized so it couldn't be dismissed as emotion. Lillian watched the folder grow thicker and thicker. It felt strange, seeing her pain turned into evidence. It made the betrayal feel both more real and more survivable. At one point, Sandra looked at her and asked gently, "Are you okay to keep going? We can pause." Lillian nodded once, because she couldn't afford to stop. Not with twins coming, not with Derek already sniffing around trust records. "Keep going," Lillian said softly. "I want every piece." Sandra's next step wasn't court, it was timing. "They humiliated you in public," Sandra said. "So the truth has to be seen too." Not whispered. Seen. But we choose where. Lillian's chest tightened. Public meant facing eyes again. Cameras again. It meant standing in front of people who once watched her get erased. Sandra tapped a calendar on her desk. "The estate lawyers have set a formal will reading," she explained. "Anyone named as an heir, alternate, or interested party is required or strongly requested to attend. Because he was your spouse when your mother died, and because he tried to access trust records, Derek is on the list. Marissa and the company's representatives have been notified as parties potentially involved in interference." Lillian's brows pulled together. "Why would he agree to show up?" Sandra's voice stayed level. "Because he still thinks your mother was small town. He'll assume this is a minor will. He'll expect to use it as a stage to paint you as unstable. He won't be able to resist an audience," Antonio added. "And he won't know what's coming until the documents are read." So Derek wasn't just cruel. He was greedy enough and arrogant enough to walk straight into an official room, holding evidence with his name all over it. Lillian stared down at her hands. Her ring was gone now. Her wrist still had a faint bruise, but her mind felt clearer than it had in months. "They called me nothing," she said. Renee looked up. Lillian's voice grew steadier. "So the folder will speak." Sandra nodded once. "Exactly." A week later, Derek received a plain envelope from the estate firm. He was in Marissa's office when he opened it. Marissa, sitting behind her desk, heels crossed, face composed but tighter than usual. He scanned the words and laughed. "She thinks this is a game," Derek said, waving the notice. "A will reading. That's for rich people. Her mom was nobody. We'll go, sit through the drama, make sure they know she's unstable, and I'll walk out clean." "Nobody." He said it like he was proud of himself for believing it. "I'll shut it down," he added. "I'll tell them about the money transfers. About how she's been." They had already signed the courthouse papers 2 days earlier. Nothing romantic, just a registry office, signatures, and an upgraded ring. Marissa didn't want a big wedding yet. She wanted documents that said this new life was official. Marissa didn't laugh. She stared at the letter longer than necessary. Her fingers tightened slightly around her pen. The notice was from Bennett Swanson, trustee counsel. It had words she understood all too well. Global trust, significant holdings, governance meeting, mandatory attendance, potential conflicts of interest to be addressed. Something had shifted in her eyes, something Derek didn't notice because Derek only noticed what fed him. "Marissa?" he asked. "You okay?" She forced a small smile. "Of course," she said. "We'll handle it. Just be prepared to answer questions about your marriage. Stick to what we practiced." Her voice was steady. Her pulse was not. That night, alone in her apartment, Marissa opened her laptop and typed, "Josephine Conley Foster Global Trust." The loading circle spun. For a moment, nothing happened. Then results began to appear slowly, selectively, like the internet itself was deciding how much truth she deserved. Regulatory filings, philanthropic shells, old articles about a reclusive financial architect whose structures manage capital in the trillions for pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, global institutions always behind other names, other boards, other brands. Marissa's face went still. Not shocked the way normal people got shocked. Still the way predators got still when they realized the prey wasn't prey at all. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. She closed the laptop slowly. For the first time, fear outweighed ambition. And in that same quiet moment, Derek's phone buzzed with another message from an acquaintance in HR, one that would push him to double down on his narrative, just as the will reading was being locked into the calendar. If you're separating from her, you should get ahead of this. People are talking. Document everything. Derek smiled at the screen. He had no idea documentation was exactly what would bury him. The doors shut with a soft click that sounded louder than a slam. In that instant, Derek Combs felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, small. Not because he was afraid of a will reading. He told himself he wasn't. He had walked into the building confident, shoulders back, wearing his best suit like armor. He told himself he was here to watch Lillian fail one last time in public. That was the plan. He had even practiced the lines in his head. I'm concerned about her stability. We're in the middle of a separation. I'm only here to answer questions. He imagined people nodding at him, whispering that he was brave for leaving her. He imagined Marissa Conway smiling behind him, proud of how clean he made it. But the room didn't feel like a place where men like Derek won. It felt like a place where truth lived in paper. The space was plain, no glamour, no stage lights, yet everything about it carried weight. The long conference table, the thick folders, the quiet people in suits who didn't smile for approval. Trustees, legal witnesses, representatives from the Trust Audit Committee. People who looked like they dealt with consequences for a living. Derek's eyes scanned the room for Lillian. He saw her a second later, and he almost didn't recognize her. Lillian Foster walked in slowly, 8 months pregnant with twins, but upright, not broken, not pleading. Her face was calm, her hair neat, her expression controlled in a way Derek had never truly understood. She moved like a woman who had already decided she would survive with or without anyone's permission. At her side was Sandra Newman, calm, prepared, a neat stack of folders at her seat. Sandra took a chair beside Lillian as if she belonged at that table. Because she did. Derek's stomach tightened. Why did Lillian look prepared? He told himself it was fake. He told himself she was bluffing. He told himself she was still the same woman he slapped and called a liability. Then he noticed something else. Marissa Conway, once his boss, now his new wife, entered behind him, heels precise, face composed, but today her expression had a new layer. Tension. She sat near Derek, not beside him. Close enough to be associated, far enough to step away if needed. That detail should have warned him. But Derek had always been slow to read anything that didn't feed his ego. At the front of the room sat Mr. Benny Swanson, the estate and trust attorney, mid-50s. Calm voice, eyes that didn't flinch. He wasn't here to comfort anyone. His role was to execute Josephine Conley's legal instructions exactly as written. Around him sat trustees and legal witnesses, people assigned to confirm the process was proper. Their job was to make the truth official. Mr. Swanson opened a folder. The estate of Josephine Conley will now be addressed, he said evenly. Please remember that this meeting is being audio recorded and certain sections will be transcribed into court filings if necessary. The room became quiet enough to hear breathing. Derek sat back, confident again for a moment. Josephine Lillian's small-town mother. He had decided she was nothing. This would be nothing. Mr. Swanson began reading. Assets, foundations, holdings, companies with names Derek didn't recognize, layered through trusts and charitable vehicles. Numbers that sounded almost unreal. Derek's confidence began to wobble. Not from guilt, Derek didn't do guilt easily, but from confusion. Why did this sound so big? He glanced at Marissa. She stared straight ahead, jaw tight, not blinking enough. Mr. Swanson continued, voice steady. These holdings are managed through the Foster Global Trust, he said. Foster? Derek frowned. That was Lillian's name now, but it had been her name before him too. He had never cared enough to ask why. He shifted in his seat. The numbers kept climbing. Millions, hundreds of millions, then billions. Derek's mouth went dry. He tried to laugh under his breath just to remind himself he was still Derek, still in control. No one joined him. Then Mr. Swanson reached the line that cracked the room open like glass. And the sole heir to the Foster Global Trust, valued at $10 billion as of the most recent audit, is Lillian Foster. That was the sentence that made Derek's hands start to shake. For a second, Derek laughed. One sharp burst. Then he stopped. Because no one else laughed. Because the room didn't react like it had heard a joke. Because Lillian didn't even blink. Derek's throat tightened, and the laugh died in his mouth like something choking. $10 Billion? His mind tried to reject it. It felt too large to hold, too absurd. He had called her dead weight. He had thrown her out. He had. Marissa stood abruptly. Her chair scraped the floor, loud in the silence. That's impossible, she said, voice too sharp. She stopped herself. Because she almost said nothing. And suddenly Marissa's composure broke just enough for everyone to see the crack. Mr. Swanson raised a hand calmly, as if he'd dealt with disruption many times before. Miss Conway, he said, you will have an opportunity to respond. Sit down, please. It wasn't a suggestion. Marissa sat, slowly. Mr. Swanson continued. Multiple attempts were made to contact Miss Foster, he said, turning a page, including a sealed letter delivered to her marital address. Our records show that letter was signed for by another adult at the residence and did not reach the intended recipient. Derek swallowed hard. Mr. Swanson's voice stayed even, but the room felt colder. Subsequently, he went on, our client's private investigator documented the destruction of estate correspondence inside that home. Destruction. Derek's eyes flicked to Marissa. Marissa's face drained. Mr. Swanson nodded to a technician near the wall. A monitor lit up. Footage. The video played silently at first, the courier at the door, Marissa signing, the envelope in her hand, then Marissa at the fireplace, feeding paper into flames. Derek's hands began to shake. He didn't want to look at the screen, but he couldn't stop. His body betrayed him the way he had betrayed Lillian. Then emails appeared, printed copies slid across the table, digital version mirrored on the monitor. Marissa coaching Derek, telling him how to frame Lillian as unstable, how to weaponize HR language, how to make a heavily pregnant woman look dangerous instead of injured. Around him, witnesses shifted in their seats. Some faces hardened, some brows lifted. People weren't whispering now, they were judging. And Derek realized something terrifying. This room wasn't his audience. It was his trial. Lillian stood, slowly. She didn't slam her hands on the table. She didn't scream. She didn't beg. She simply stood, pregnant, bruises faint but not forgotten, calm. When she spoke, her voice was quiet enough that people leaned in. I was called nothing, she said. Silence. Her eyes moved to Derek. You were right. She continued softly. Derek's throat tightened. For the first time, he wanted to speak, not to attack, but to stop whatever was coming. He had nothing. Lillian's voice didn't rise. I was everything you couldn't see. And in that moment, Derek understood the true cruelty of his own choice. He had abandoned a woman who was richer than anything he could ever become. But more than that, he had abandoned a woman who had been loyal. And loyalty, once broken, didn't return. A security officer from the Trust's internal team stepped forward from the corner of the room. Professional, firm, he approached Marissa. Miss Conway, he said quietly, you're required to remain available for further questioning. Company counsel has been notified. You understand that? Marissa's eyes flicked to Derek. Just one look. And she stepped back, not toward him, away from him, as if he was already sinking. As if she had just decided he wasn't worth saving. And Derek, still shaking, suddenly realized the next public room wouldn't be a will reading, it would be a courtroom, and he wouldn't be the one holding the microphone. The courtroom doors opened, and Derek Combs walked in like a man stepping into a storm he could no longer talk his way out of. His hands were still, too still. His face was tight, eyes red from nights without sleep. He wore a suit that used to make him feel powerful, but today it looked like a costume on a man who had lost his script. The room was packed, not with cheering guests like the party where he humiliated Lillian, but with people who didn't clap for cruelty, court staff, legal interns. A few corporate faces from his old company, there as silent observers. Even Karen Mullen, his mother, sat stiff and pale, her mouth pressed into a thin line like she was trying to hold her pride inside her teeth. She was learning the hard way that a courtroom wasn't a living room. You couldn't bully the judge into agreeing with you. Lillian Foster entered next, still pregnant but closer to her due date now, walking carefully but with her head high. Her bruises were faint, but her composure was sharper than pain. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't trembling. She looked like a woman who had learned something sharp. Mercy is not owed to people who weaponize your silence. Sandra Newman walked beside her, calm and prepared, a stack of folders in her hands. Derek's throat tightened when he saw those folders. Folders were truth. And truth was what he had been avoiding. The judge wasn't on a raised stage in this story, no dramatic movie speeches, no theatrical gavel slams. The judge's presence was felt through order and rules, through the way people stood when told, through the way voices lowered automatically. The courtroom didn't care about Derek's ego, it cared about evidence. Derek had already been fired. It happened fast after the will reading. His company's risk department moved first, followed by HR. His access badge stopped working. His inbox was frozen, pending internal review. Calls from his manager stopped. The official letter arrived a few days later. Employment terminated effective immediately, subject to ongoing investigation into serious policy violations. His allies vanished with the speed of trained animals. The same people who had laughed at his jokes stopped responding. The same executives who had watched Lillian stand with assistants suddenly had urgent meetings they couldn't miss. Even Karen noticed that neighbors who once praised her successful son now averted their eyes at the grocery store. The humiliation he created had turned around and hunted him. And Derek, for the first time, understood what it felt like to be erased. Sandra didn't waste time. She opened the first folder. She didn't speak like an angry woman. She spoke like a surgeon. "Your Honor," she said calmly, "this matter involves financial manipulation within the marriage, domestic intimidation, attempted interference with an estate process, and coordinated reputational harm against my client while she was 8 months pregnant with twins." Derek flinched at the framing. Sandra presented the documents like bricks building a wall Derek couldn't climb. Renee Gilbert's forensic reports showed the audit template accusing Lillian of siphoning funds was created in Marissa's department, not by HR. Metadata, timestamps, user IDs. It wasn't someone could have. It was, this is who did. Antonio's footage showed Marissa entering the home, removing estate mail, burning correspondence. Swanson's letter logs showed delivery, signature by M. Conway, and no response from Lillian. Bank records documented joint funds rerouted into accounts linked to Marissa's holding company. Texts and emails showed Marissa coaching Derek word for word how to frame Lillian as unstable, how to use concern and safety as excuses, how to turn a public expulsion into a narrative where he looked like the victim. Even the night of the party had been prepared. Security briefings, notes instructing them not to let Lillian back inside if things got emotional, orders to escort her out if necessary. Derek's lawyer tried to argue marital conflict, mixed messages, stress from pregnancy. Sandra didn't raise her voice. She simply turned another page, and another. It was like watching a dam break, but quietly. Lillian sat beside Sandra, hands folded over her belly, eyes fixed ahead. She didn't look at Derek. She didn't need to. She was done seeking his humanity. The judge listened. And when Derek's lawyer finally paused, the judge spoke in a voice that made the whole room feel colder. The words were simple, but the meaning was heavy. Temporary sole decision-making for Lillian regarding medical and financial matters during the pregnancy. Protective orders limiting Derek's contact. Restrictions on him coming near the marital home or hospital without court permission. Orders freezing any attempt by Derek to access estate or trust records on Lillian's behalf. Derek's chest tightened. Custody-related restrictions meant he couldn't just show up and demand access to the babies when they were born. Everything would go through court. Financial restraints meant he couldn't grab at money like a desperate man anymore. The judge didn't need to call him cruel. The law did it for him. Derek stood too quickly, as if standing could restore some of the power he lost. "Your Honor, he started, voice cracking. "She's turning everyone against me. I didn't know about the trust. I was misled." "Marissa," he wanted to explain. He wanted to blame Marissa. He wanted to say he was just under pressure. He wanted to say he didn't know the letter was about billions. But the judge didn't let him finish. One raised hand, one firm interruption. "This is not the venue to relitigate the trust," the judge said. "We are dealing with your conduct as a spouse and father. Sit down, Mr. Combs." The courtroom didn't need Derek's performance. It already had Derek's pattern. Derek sat down like a man being lowered into a grave of his own decisions. Karen's face hardened beside him, but her eyes darted around the room. She was watching the crowd, watching who still looked at her with respect. And she was realizing something too. This time, her authority couldn't override the truth. When the hearing ended, Derek followed Lillian out. His steps were fast, desperate, almost childlike. He pushed through the exit doors as if fresh air could fix what the courtroom had sealed. Lillian walked carefully down the steps. Sandra beside her, Antonio nearby like quiet protection. Derek called her name. Lillian, he said, voice raw. Wait, please. The word please sounded wrong in his mouth, like he'd borrowed it from someone kinder. Lillian didn't stop. Derek reached out, fingers stretching as if touching her sleeve could bring back the life he threw away. He didn't grab her. He knew cameras might be there, but the intention was still ugly, possessive. Sandra shifted slightly, placing herself between them without drama. Lillian finally spoke, but she didn't turn around. Her voice was calm, low, almost tired. You should have asked for my side, she said. That was it. Not an insult, not a scream, just one sentence that exposed everything Derek had refused to do. Listen, Derek swallowed hard. He wanted to say he was sorry. He wanted to say he didn't know. He wanted to say he got swept up. But the truth was simple. He chose to believe lies because lies promised him status. Lillian walked on, and Derek stood there, watching the back of the woman he once called a liability. Now she was walking away with her future protected by law, and he was left holding nothing but his own shame. A few minutes later, when the crowd had thinned, Derek looked around, searching for Marissa. She wasn't there. No heels clicking behind him. No cold hand guiding him. No confident smile. Just absence. His phone buzzed in his pocket, a single message, from a number he knew too well. Marissa's. Don't contact me again. Handle your own mess. Derek's blood went cold, because in one line, he understood the final betrayal. Marissa wasn't falling with him. She was leaving him behind. And somewhere Marissa was already making her next move, one that would decide whether she vanished quietly or got dragged into the light. The headline hit the screens like a final punch. Not Derek's name, he was already finished. Not Karen's, she had retreated into silence. The name flashing everywhere was the one Derek once treated like dirt. Heavily pregnant woman slapped and publicly dumped, becomes sole heir to 10 billion Foster Global Trust, fraud probe targets executive boss. Underneath, Lillian Foster. A photo followed Lillian leaving the courthouse weeks earlier, chin lifted, one hand resting over her stomach, Sandra Newman at her side like a shield. People online zoomed in on the faint bruise, on the way she kept walking anyway. Comment sections filled with words that used to belong to other people, not to her. Heir, trust, fraud investigation, trillion-dollar structures. Lillian saw none of it in real time. She was in a quiet hospital room, lights dim, holding 2 newborn babies against her chest. The twins were small, warm, and real in a way money could never be. One of them curled a tiny fist around her finger like a promise. For a moment, the world outside didn't matter. Then her phone buzzed softly on the bedside table. Sandra's name appeared. Lillian didn't panic. Panic belonged to the old life, the one where Derek controlled the story. She answered slowly, voice soft so she wouldn't wake the babies. Sandra sounded calm but satisfied. It's done, she said. The final family court orders came through. You have sole legal authority for now. Protective measures stay in place. And Mr. Swanson's team just confirmed the transfers. They've completed the estate process. The trust distributions are now legally locked under your sole control. Locked. That word mattered, because it meant Derek couldn't claw at her future anymore. No matter how hungry he was, it meant Karen couldn't whisper her way into control. It meant Marissa couldn't use procedure and concern as weapons again. Lillian's eyes closed briefly. She didn't feel joy the way people expected. She felt something quieter. Release. Like something heavy had finally been lifted off her ribs. She looked down at her babies and let herself breathe. You're safe, she thought. Not just to them, also to herself. Months later, Marissa Conway resurfaced alone. No Derek, no title, no protection. Her name appeared in corporate memos first, not gossip columns. Resignation accepted. Pending completion of internal review. Subject of ongoing investigation into misuse of position. Documents referred to regulators. The same systems she once used to destroy. Lillian's reputation turned cold and sharp against her. Company compliance officers, who used to defer to her, now interviewed her with recorders running. External regulators matched the trust's footage and Renee's forensic reports with internal audit logs. The burned letter was ash, but the act of burning it wasn't not when video, delivery records, and email trails existed. Marissa did what opportunists always did when the ground cracked. She ran, not with a dramatic suitcase in the night, with lawyers, with carefully worded statements, with stepping away for personal reasons. She tried to slip away wearing a different name, a different brand, but evidence didn't care about branding. Antonio's footage didn't disappear because she deleted her social media. Renee's financial trail didn't evaporate because she changed her phone number. The emails, those polished, cruel instructions, had been preserved on servers she couldn't control. Peers who once smiled at her stopped taking her calls. Doors that opened easily before stayed shut. The silence around her became the loudest punishment. And somewhere in that silence, Marissa finally understood what Lillian had learned earlier. Power built on cruelty always expires. Lillian didn't post long threads online. She didn't subtweet. She didn't share screenshots. She didn't need to. When she finally stepped before cameras, it wasn't for drama. It was for closure. She stood with Sandra beside her and spoke clearly, slowly, so no one could twist her words. "This isn't revenge," Lillian said. "It's truth." Her voice didn't shake. "The truth protects my children," she continued. "And it protects other women who are told to stay quiet when they're being harmed. If you're watching this and you think staying silent makes you loyal, it doesn't. It makes other people comfortable." People listen, not just because she was rich now, but because she was real. Because they'd seen the video of her being slapped while pregnant and the later footage of her walking into court with her head up. She finished simply, "I won't discuss details beyond what's in the public record. The courts have spoken. The trust has spoken. I'm going back to my life." Then she stepped away from the microphones. No threats, no insults, no messy speeches, just a woman walking back to her life. Lillian sat by a sunlit window months later, holding her twins in her arms. They'd grown. One grabbed at her necklace chain, the other slept with their tiny mouth open. The house around her was different from Derek's old house. Not louder, not more glamorous, just hers, secure, quiet. Papers with trust seals and investment summaries lay neatly in a drawer, not on the table. She didn't have to flaunt any of it. She didn't look hidden anymore. She didn't look small, not silent, not erased, unshaken. And somewhere far away, a man who once called her nothing sat in the echo of his own choices. Realizing the worst kind of karma wasn't losing money, he had remarried fast, chasing status in a new ring and a new wife. But even that second marriage couldn't protect him from the fallout of what he'd done. It was losing access to a woman who would have loved him honestly. Even after the cameras moved on, the truth stayed waiting quietly for the next person who thought loyalty was weakness. "I hope you enjoyed watching it as much as I enjoyed creating it," the narrator voice returns. Like, share, and comment on the lessons you've learned. Let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. See you in my next video. Unaware his wife secretly owned the company he bragged about, he let his mistress slap her in front of their kids on Christmas Eve. But months later, she walked into a board meeting he wasn't allowed to enter. He didn't just fail her as a husband. He failed her as a father, in his own living room, beneath Christmas lights and in front of their children, while another woman stood where his wife should have been. On Christmas Eve, with wrapping paper still on the floor and the kids clutching half-open toys, Nicholas Holland stood next to a woman in a bright red dress, his colleague, Marla Gray, and bragged about the company he claimed he had built from nothing. "This is what pressure looks like," he said loudly, arm brushing Marla's. "Elaine doesn't really understand business." Across the room, Elaine Connor, his quiet wife, the one who cooked the meals, calmed the kids, and stayed out of the spotlight, and stood near the tree, hands folded so the children wouldn't see them tremble. To everyone else, she was just the soft-spoken mother in a simple dress, the woman who didn't get it, the one who should be grateful. Marla stepped closer, smiling with practiced sweetness that didn't reach her eyes. "Some people don't belong everywhere they're invited," she said, gaze locked on Elaine. And then, in front of the children, in front of family, in front of a man who was supposed to protect her, Marla raised her hand and slapped Elaine across the face. The room went silent. Nicholas didn't move. He didn't shield his wife. He looked at her with disgust and said, "Clear enough for everyone to hear. You brought this on yourself. Always a burden." What most people in that room didn't know, not Nicholas, not Marla, not the relatives clutching their phones, was that the woman they just humiliated already held something far more powerful than their approval. The company Nicholas bragged about like a trophy? On paper, in trusts and signatures he'd skimmed but never really understood. It had never truly been his. Months later, when he walked down a quiet hallway toward a board meeting and found the door locked to him but opening for her, that Christmas Eve would come back to him in a way he could never escape. Dear viewers, thank you for being here. If you watch without subscribing, it's like leaving Elaine standing alone in that living room while everyone else looks away. When you hit that button, you stand with every quiet soul who was mocked, erased, yet still rose. Please subscribe now and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. The room was loud with laughter, glasses clinking, voices overlapping, and at the center of it stood 38-year-old Nicholas Holland, confident, polished, halfway through another story about himself. He lifted his glass higher than necessary, enjoying the way conversations bent toward him. They usually did. He was tall, well-dressed, the kind of man people assumed was successful before he ever opened his mouth. And once he did, he made sure no one doubted it. He spoke about his company, his sacrifices, his long nights carrying the weight of everyone else. Just behind him, half a step back, stood his wife, 35-year-old Elaine Connor. She wasn't holding a drink. She was holding a small plate, one hand steadying it, the other resting lightly at her side, a posture learned over years of not interrupting. Her expression was calm, almost gentle, but her eyes stayed alert, tracking the room the way mothers always did, checking exits, counting heads, making sure the children hadn't wandered too far. Nicholas laughed mid-sentence and said something about how pressure wasn't for everyone, how some people stayed home, sheltered, while others built empires. He didn't look at Elaine when he said it, but the pause afterward made it clear who he meant. Elaine smiled faintly. She always did. To outsiders, it looked like patience. To family, it looked like loyalty. To Nicholas, it looked like proof that he was right, that she knew her place and accepted it. No one in the room noticed the thin leather folder tucked under Elaine's arm. Dark brown, worn at the edges. Always with her when paperwork was involved, always quiet, always closed. Elaine had a habit that confused people who thought they knew her. She let other people take credit. At home, that habit looked like calm. At family dinners, it looked like silence. In her marriage, it looked like devotion, the kind that never corrected, never challenged, never embarrassed. Nicholas loved telling the story of his rise. He told it often, at work mixers, at holidays, even to strangers in line. He described how he had saved a struggling logistics company, how he had taken risks, how he had shouldered responsibility while Elaine focused on the children. She wouldn't understand that kind of pressure, he liked to say, shaking his head with a practiced smile. Elaine would excuse herself then, check on the kids, refill a cup, anything to keep the peace intact. But the truth of Elaine Connor didn't begin with Nicholas. It began years earlier, long before his speeches and the applause. Elaine grew up in rooms filled with documents, not noise. Her father, Aaron Dickerson, had been a quiet man with steady hands and careful eyes. He ran a regional logistics company, Dickerson Freight, that never chased attention, but never failed either. Trucks moved on time, contracts were honored, people were paid. When Elaine was young, she used to sit at the corner of his desk doing homework while he reviewed reports. He didn't simplify things for her, he explained them. Ownership isn't about being loud, he once told her, sliding a document toward her. It's about responsibility, and the people who shout the most usually understand it the least. When Aaron died unexpectedly, Elaine was 26. People assumed his brothers or some longtime manager would take over. Instead, lawyers gathered in a quiet conference room and explained what Aaron had arranged years earlier. Through carefully structured shares, Elaine became the controlling owner of Dickerson Freight, not publicly, not loudly, but legally and completely. The board knew, the lawyers knew. A professional trustee was appointed to vote the shares according to her written instructions. To the outside world, though, the company looked like it belonged to a cluster of institutional investors. Advisors suggested she step forward, take the title, sit at the head of the table. Elaine chose something else. She remembered her father's voice, low and deliberate, in one of their last serious talks. If you ever love someone proud, he had said, protect yourself quietly. Don't argue with ego, prepare for it. So she did. Years later, when the board recruited an ambitious operations manager named Nicholas Holland to modernize systems and drive growth, Elaine watched his early performance from a distance. He was undeniably talented, charismatic. He brought in new contracts, staff liked him, revenue climbed. He also loved attention. He talked a little too long in meetings, took up a little too much space in discussions, but back then, it still looked like confidence, not contempt. Elaine met him at a company event, not as the owner, but as the founder's daughter visiting old colleagues. He was drawn to her calm, her steadiness, her refusal to be impressed by his jokes. They fell in love, or something close enough that she believed in it. When they married, Elaine placed her shares into a blind family trust. She appointed an independent legal custodian. She kept her name off any document Nicholas ever glanced at in daily operations. On paper, the trust was the majority owner. Inside sealed instructions, only the trustee and company counsel saw Elaine's full authority. At home, it was almost never mentioned. Not because Nicholas asked her to hide it, because she saw what ambition did to him. She saw how his confidence sharpened when he felt admired, how his tone shifted when he felt superior, how quickly pride replaced partnership. Elaine chose love over visibility, believing, at the time, that silence was safer. Back in the present, Nicholas finished his story to another round of approval. Someone clapped him on the shoulder, someone called him impressive. Elaine felt the familiar tightening in her chest, not pain, not yet, but awareness. She noticed things others didn't, how Nicholas barely skimmed contracts anymore, how he signed where he was told, how certain letters from the trustee never crossed the kitchen table because Elaine redirected them first, asking counsel for clarification before forwarding anything he needed to see. She had been correcting legal language quietly for years, fixing mistakes before they mattered, protecting him from consequences he didn't know he was courting. He mistook that protection for weakness. As the gathering continued, Elaine stepped away, slipping into the hallway to check on the children. Their laughter grounded her. Their trust reminded her why she had stayed quiet for so long. Behind her, Nicholas began another story, this one about his board, about how his company was moving into a new phase, about how he was finally getting the recognition he deserved. Elaine paused just long enough to listen. She didn't turn around. She didn't correct him. She didn't interrupt. She simply held the leather folder a little tighter, because silence, she knew, was only powerful when it was chosen. And one day soon, Nicholas Holland would mistake that silence for something else entirely. A woman who doesn't speak, he would think, is a woman who has nothing to say. The house lights dimmed as the evening wound down. Elaine ushered the children toward their coats, already sensing a shift in the air the way pride was hardening into something sharper. Something that would soon invite another presence into their lives, someone who wouldn't stay half a step behind. Elaine didn't know her name yet, but she could already feel the space being cleared. In the next room, Nicholas laughed again, unaware that the story he loved telling was standing quietly behind him, waiting for the moment it would finally be told differently. Just, don't embarrass me tonight. The words landed hard, sharp enough to cut through the quiet of the bedroom. Nicholas stood in front of the mirror, adjusting his tie, jaw tight, eyes fixed on his own reflection. He didn't look at Elaine when he said it. He didn't need to. The sentence wasn't an invitation to respond. It was a warning. Elaine froze for half a second. She was already dressed a simple, soft-colored dress, chosen because it was comfortable and easy to move in. The kids were with a sitter. She had planned to be home early. Nothing flashy. Nothing that would draw attention. She studied Nicholas's reflection instead of her own. The impatience in his movements, the faint irritation pulling at the corners of his mouth. It's just stress, she told herself. A big quarter, a coming board review. That's what marriage was, she reminded herself, absorbing pressure so it didn't spill everywhere else. She nodded once, quiet, automatic. Nicholas exhaled, satisfied, and grabbed his phone. The screen lit up briefly before he turned it face down again. It buzzed once, then stopped. Elaine noticed. She always noticed. The event space buzzed with energy, low music, clinking glasses, clusters of people dressed to impress. Nicholas seemed to expand the moment he walked in. His shoulders straightened, his voice grew louder. People turned toward him without being asked. Nick, tell us how you pulled that off. Nicholas laughed, warm and confident. He started telling the story again, the one about rescuing Dickerson Freed, about late nights, about pressure Elaine wouldn't understand. Elaine stood beside him, half a step back. At first she stayed quiet, let him talk, let him shine. That had always been their unspoken agreement. But when someone asked about a recent shipment delay, Elaine spoke softly, instinctively. It was weather-related, she said. The rerouting. Nicholas waved his hand without turning toward her. You wouldn't understand, he said lightly, smiling at the group. She doesn't really know business. The laughter that followed was polite, controlled, safe. Elaine felt the heat rush to her face, then drain away just as fast. She took a step back, physically giving him more space, as if shrinking might make the moment disappear. He didn't notice. Or worse, he did. As the night went on, Elaine watched the shift solidify. Nicholas leaned closer to the people praising him. He interrupted others now, corrected them, claimed victories that had never been his alone. When Elaine placed a hand lightly on his arm to remind him of time, he brushed it away. Handle it, he muttered under his breath. I'm busy. The word handle echoed in her chest. Later, Elaine stepped out onto the balcony for air. That was when she heard the laughter. Not the polite kind from inside. This was lower, intimate, confident. Nicholas stood a few feet away, phone pressed to his ear, posture relaxed in a way Elaine hadn't seen in months. You're right, he said quietly, a smile curling at his mouth. She doesn't get it. Some people are just liabilities. The word hit Elaine harder than the insult earlier. Liability. He laughed again, softer this time, and turned away slightly, lowering his voice. Elaine stepped back into the shadows before he could see her. She didn't confront him. Not then. She didn't cry. She didn't demand answers. Instead, she began collecting details. The changes came quickly after that. Passwords stopped working. Shared accounts needed verification. Nicholas grew defensive when she asked simple questions. Her joint debit card declined once at the grocery store, just long enough for the cashier to apologize, just long enough for a stranger behind her to sigh impatiently. Elaine called the bank from her car. The representative explained that large transfers had been made into a business operations account Nicholas controlled. That night, Nicholas blamed the bank. Later, when she asked why he hadn't told her, he blamed her. You've always been bad with money, he snapped. You spend too much. You don't know pressure like I do. Elaine stared at him, searching his face for the man she married. The one who used to listen. The one who used to say, we. She found something else instead. Resentment. And beneath it, contempt. When he called her dead weight for the first time, the words settled into the room like dust, coating everything it touched. He didn't apologize. He didn't soften it. He said it like a fact. Elaine said nothing. Silence had become her shield. That night, after the children were asleep, Elaine sat alone at the kitchen table. The house was quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. She reached for the thin leather folder she hadn't opened in months. Inside were documents she knew by heart, trust agreements, ownership clauses, protections her father had insisted on. She read them again slowly, grounding herself in their language. Everything was still intact. Everything was still protected, financially at least. But as Elaine closed the folder, she felt something shift inside her, a realization settling deeper than fear. Protection, she understood now, didn't stop disrespect. It didn't stop humiliation, and it certainly didn't stop someone who believed your silence meant you had no power left to lose. Elaine turned off the kitchen light and stood there in the dark for a moment, listening to Nicholas's muffled voice upstairs, laughing into his phone again. A laugh she didn't recognize anymore. Somewhere in that laughter, she sensed, there was room being made for someone else. And when that someone arrived, Elaine knew the cruelty would no longer be quiet. The next insult wouldn't be spoken behind her back. Elaine first saw Marla Gray standing where Elaine usually stood. The realization hit her like a sudden drop in the stomach, sharp, immediate, disorienting. It was a small pre-holiday gathering, nothing formal. Just a few colleagues, a few friends, lights strung too neatly to feel casual. Nicholas had insisted on hosting some key people from work at the house. Elaine had stepped into the room with practiced calm, already scanning for the children, already bracing for Nicholas's mood on a night tied to company politics. And then she saw it. Her place was taken. Not aggressively, not loudly, just occupied. The woman wore red, not festive red, not soft red, but confident, red-fitted, deliberate, the kind of color chosen by someone who expected to be seen. She stood close to Nicholas, angled slightly toward him, body relaxed, one hand resting lightly on the back of the chair Elaine usually used during these gatherings. Nicholas didn't move her. That was the first shock. He smiled instead. "Elaine," he said, voice bright, almost overeager. "This is Marla Gray. She's important at work." The pause before important lingered longer than it should have. Elaine nodded politely. She offered her hand. Marla took it loosely, eyes flicking over Elaine's fingers, her shoes, the cut of her dress, a slow, assessing scan that felt less like curiosity and more like measurement. "So this is her," Marla said, smiling as if she were confirming something to herself. Elaine felt the heat rise but kept her posture steady. Marla leaned closer to Nicholas and murmured something too quiet to hear. Nicholas laughed, not his polite laugh, but the one he used when he felt admired. Elaine stepped aside, instinctively giving space. No one noticed. Marla Gray was younger than Elaine by a few years, early 30s, polished, sharp-eyed, the kind of woman who spoke with certainty, using words like efficiency and strategy like they were moral virtues. Elaine learned who she was quickly. Marla was an outside operations consultant, brought in, Nicholas said, to streamline things and get the company ready for real growth. He talked about her ideas with excitement he hadn't shown Elaine in months. He repeated Marla's phrases at dinner, nodding as if they were revelations. "She sees the bigger picture," he said once. "She's not emotional about it." The words landed like a quiet accusation. That first night, Elaine heard Marla's voice again in the hallway. "She's sweet," Marla said, not unkindly, "but soft. You've outgrown that." Elaine stood frozen just beyond the doorway, breath shallow, heart thudding in her ears. Nicholas didn't disagree. That was worse than if he had. From that night on, Marla didn't fade, she expanded. At the office, staff saw her in meetings she technically wasn't supposed to lead. At home, she began appearing in stories. Nicholas told Marla suggested this. Marla says that's outdated until her name floated through their dining room, more often than Elaine's. Then she started showing up in person, first as the consultant who happened to be nearby, dropping in after late meetings to continue urgent discussions at the house. Then as a regular presence, arriving before Elaine finished setting the table, offering to help in a way that never actually helped. She moved through Elaine's kitchen with ease, commenting on decor, opening cabinets, standing too close to Nicholas. Once Elaine found her pouring coffee from Elaine's mug. "You don't mind, right?" Marla said lightly, already sipping. "I feel like I'm practically family now." Elaine forced a smile. Marla corrected Elaine in front of others. About schedules, about plans, about things Elaine had managed quietly for years. She laughed softly at Elaine's clothes once, tilting her head. "You're very simple," she said. "It's refreshing. Some people try too hard." Nicholas chuckled. Elaine stopped laughing with them after that. The first time Elaine tried to talk to Nicholas about it, she chose her moment carefully. The children were asleep. The house was quiet. "I feel pushed aside," Elaine said calmly. "She crosses boundaries." Nicholas sighed, rubbing his face. "You're overreacting," he said. "She's helping me. Don't make this a thing. Don't make this a thing." The sentence slammed a door. After that, Nicholas stopped pretending. Marla did too. She took Elaine's usual seat at the table without asking. She leaned into Nicholas during conversations. She made comments about upgrades and moving forward, always glancing at Elaine afterward. Once as Elaine gathered plates, Marla laughed and said to the group, "Some people don't belong everywhere they're invited." A few people shifted uncomfortably. No one challenged her. Elaine's hands trembled slightly. She steadied them against the counter. Silence had always been her shield. But shields, she was learning, invited attack when mistaken for surrender. The children noticed before Elaine fully accepted what was happening. One evening, as Elaine tucked her daughter into bed, the girl hesitated, then whispered, "Why does Daddy smile more when she's here?" The question broke something open in Elaine's chest. She brushed her daughter's hair gently, searching for an answer that wouldn't burden a child. "I don't know," she said finally. And for the first time, she admitted to herself how dangerous not knowing had become. Elaine began paying closer attention. to how Marla positioned herself between Elaine and Nicholas in rooms, to how Nicholas deferred to Marla's opinions automatically, to how the atmosphere shifted when Marla entered heavier, sharper, colder. And beneath it all, Elaine felt something building, not just disrespect but preparation, as if space was being cleared, as if the house itself were being rearranged for someone else. Elaine stood alone in the living room one night, watching Marla laugh beside Nicholas, watching her red dress glow against the soft holiday lights. Christmas decorations were already up. The tree stood tall in the corner, lights blinking quietly, patient and unaware. Elaine wrapped her arms around herself, a strange calm settling in. Christmas was only days away, and something told her that whatever line still existed in this house, it wouldn't survive the holiday. The slap didn't come out of chaos, it came out of order. The house was full that night. Nicholas's relatives, a few colleagues from the company, the children in new pajamas racing around with toys. Christmas music played low in the background. The smell of roasted food clung to the air. To anyone walking in for the first time, it looked like a normal Christmas Eve. Elaine knew better. She had spent the day moving on autopilot, cooking, tidying, guiding the kids through their excitement, keeping her voice gentle even when her chest felt tight. Nicholas had insisted that some important people from work join them this year. "It's good optics," he'd said. "We're a family company. It looks stable." He hadn't said for my image, but he didn't need to. Marla arrived early. Red dress, red lipstick. No shame. She greeted Nicholas first, arms looping easily around his neck. Then she turned to Elaine and offered a polite hug that never got close enough to actually touch. "Thank you for having us," she said, as if the house weren't already treating her like it recognized her footsteps. Elaine nodded. "Of course." The evening slid by in careful slices. Elaine handed out plates, helped the kids set up their toys, smiled for photos she didn't want to be in. She watched quietly as Nicholas hovered near Marla more than he did near his own children. "He's under a lot of pressure," a cousin whispered once, trying to be kind. Elaine just nodded. Later in the living room, with wrapping paper scattered on the floor and the children showing their gifts to anyone who would look, Nicholas positioned himself near the tree. Marla stood beside him, close enough that their shoulders brushed. "This," Nicholas said loudly, gesturing around him, "is what pressure looks like. Building something from the ground up, most people can't handle it." He didn't look at Elaine, but his eyes flicked past her. "Elaine doesn't really understand business," he added, with a practiced half-laugh. A relative laughed weakly, unsure. Elaine felt several pairs of eyes flick toward her, then away. No one spoke. One of Nicholas's uncles tried to change the subject. "Well, whatever you're doing, Nick, it's working. The company's growing." Marla smiled, tilting her head. "With the right leadership," she said. "You have to make tough calls. Some people hold you back without meaning to." Her gaze slid over to Elaine. Earlier that evening, in the kitchen, a smaller incident had already planted the seed. Nicholas had been telling a detailed story about a large client contract. The numbers he quoted were off. The date he gave for the contract's renewal was wrong off by months. Elaine, who still read every quarterly report the trustee sent, corrected him gently. "The renewal was in March, not January," she said. "You were in Chicago then, remember?" Nicholas flushed, just slightly, in front of the two colleagues listening. Marla had stepped in quickly, hand on his arm. "She nitpicks," she said with a soft laugh. "It's cute at home, but it makes him look bad in front of people." The word "bad" had lodged in Nicholas's ego like a splinter. By the time they reached the living room, Marla had leaned into that wound. "She keeps undercutting you," she had whispered, "in front of your own staff. If you don't stop it now, the board will think you're weak." Nicholas, already raw and proud, believed her. Back in the living room, Elaine stood near the edge of the group, hands loosely clasped, the children moving in and out of her orbit. Marla turned toward her. "Well," she said lightly, swirling the wine in her glass, "I suppose it's time we stop pretending." Elaine's heart rate ticked up. "Pretending about what?" she asked quietly, glancing at the children, who were close enough to hear tone if not words. "That this, Marla," gestured vaguely in Elaine's direction, "is working." A few relatives shifted uneasily. Someone muttered, "Hey, maybe not in front of the kids." Nicholas didn't step in. Elaine opened her mouth, not to argue, to de-escalate, to move the conversation away from the children. She didn't get the chance. Marla stepped forward. The slap was deliberate, measured, not impulsive. Her eyes were clear. Her arm didn't shake. Her palm met Elaine's cheek with a sharp crack that cut straight through the music and the murmurs. Elaine's head turned with the force of it. Heat exploded across her cheek. The sound echoed off the walls, louder than the carols, louder than the little gasp someone tried and failed to swallow. For a fraction of a second, no one moved. Then the children screamed. One dropped a toy. One ran toward Elaine. Another pressed against the couch, eyes wide. Elaine staggered back, one hand flying to her face, the other reaching blindly toward her children. Her ears rang, her vision blurred at the edges. The taste of metal filled her mouth. A cousin started to step between them. Nicholas lifted a hand slightly, not to shield Elaine, but to stop his cousin. "Nick," the cousin began. Nicholas cut him off with a look. Marla didn't look shocked. She didn't look angry either. She looked satisfied. "Nick, what are you doing?" someone whispered harshly. Nicholas ignored them. Elaine dropped to her knees, gathering her crying children into her arms, shielding them with her body as if something else might come next. For a heartbeat, she waited. Not for apologies, for instinct, for Nicholas to move, to shout, to put himself between them. He didn't. He took a breath, looked straight at her, and said, his voice flat and clear enough for everyone to hear, "You brought this on yourself. Always embarrassing me. Always a burden." The words hit harder than the slap. A burden. Around them, the room froze in a new way. Several people looked down. One aunt fumbled with her phone, filming but half aiming it at the carpet, too afraid to stop what was happening, too ashamed to look directly. No one stepped fully forward, some out of cowardice, some out of shock. Some because Nicholas was their provider now, the successful one, and they didn't want to get involved. Later, Elaine's lawyer would get copies of those shaky videos. But in that moment, all Elaine had was the burning in her cheek and the weight of small bodies clinging to her. That was when something inside her went quiet, not shattered, not broken, sealed. She stood slowly, her movements careful, controlled. She didn't shout. She didn't accuse. She didn't ask why. She looked at one of Nicholas's aunts, the one whose eyes were already wet with guilt, and said, "Steady, can you please help the children upstairs? I need to get their things." The aunt nodded quickly, taking the children's hands, whispering soothing words as they moved toward the staircase. Marla watched Elaine with open triumph now. Nicholas said nothing. Nothing as Elaine walked past him. Nothing as she went up the stairs. Nothing as a door closed gently behind her. Upstairs, Elaine knelt beside small beds, hands shaking only when the children couldn't see her face. She checked their arms, their cheeks, making sure none of them had been hurt in the rush. They clung to her. "Are we in trouble?" one whispered. "No," Elaine said firmly. "You are not in trouble. This is not your fault." Downstairs, the murmur of voices rose and fell. A door opened, closed. Someone left early, muttering about drama. No one called the police. Elaine sat on the floor beside her children until their breathing slowed. That was when she decided she would not raise them in a house where violence was performed and then justified as her fault. When they finally drifted into uneasy sleep, still in their clothes, Elaine stayed awake on the edge of the bed, cheek throbbing, mind suddenly very clear. She would leave, not with a slammed door, with a plan. Because the woman who lay awake in that house on Christmas Eve was not the woman who would still be living there in the morning. And somewhere on a hard drive in someone's pocket, a shaking video already existed, a record that would later speak for her when other people refused to. Elaine left before the sun came up. Not in tears, not in panic. The decision had been made hours earlier on the edge of that bed, listening to her children whimper in their sleep every time a door creaked downstairs. She moved fast and quiet, heart steady, hands sure. The house was finally silent. Nicholas had gone to the guest room after most guests left, muttering something about needing space. Marla had called a car and slipped out just after midnight, not wanting to be around the children's crying. It was easier to leave when neither of them was watching. Elaine dressed the children gently, whispering that they were going to stay somewhere calmer for a while. They blinked sleepily but didn't argue. The older one looked at her cheek and didn't ask. Shoes, coats, backpacks, important documents she had already gathered in the night, the leather folder, a change of clothes each, medications, birth certificates from the file box she'd memorized the location of years ago. She didn't look at the walls. She didn't look at the photos. She didn't look back. By the time the first light touched the street, the house behind her was already something else, not a home, not a memory, just a structure she no longer needed to explain herself inside. Nicholas didn't call that morning. He slept in. When he finally came downstairs and saw the empty rooms, the absence of small voices, the neatly cleared shoe rack, he stood still for a long time. Then he got angry. And then he performed. He filed. And he made sure everyone knew it. Over the next days, he waved the divorce papers like a prop, telling anyone who would listen that Elaine had finally shown her true colors. He said she was unstable, too emotional, a burden he had carried for years. He hinted that money had gone missing, that she had never understood pressure, that she was a liability. He didn't say he had watched another woman hit her. He didn't say the children were there. People filled in the blanks the way people always do. Marla helped. She moved in fast, too fast for anyone who believed the "we were just colleagues" story. Neighbors saw her through the windows within days, barefoot, comfortable, wearing one of Elaine's old robes like it had always belonged to her. She sat in Elaine's chair at the table. She laughed loudly. She told friends openly, "This is where we'll live now." She didn't say Elaine's name. She didn't have to. Elaine heard all of this secondhand through texts that began with "I didn't know how to tell you" and ended with "I'm so sorry." Through pauses in conversations when people realized she wasn't hysterical, she was calm, composed, not begging. They mistook that calm for defeat. Elaine let them. The first meeting happened 2 days later, in a quiet office with frosted glass and no distractions. Janice Thomas, the lawyer, her father had told her to keep in her contacts just in case, was in her late 40s, hair pulled back, eyes sharp but kind. Elaine hadn't needed her in all the years since Aaron's death. Now she did. Janice listened without interrupting. Elaine told the story plainly. The insults, the financial control, the slap, the fact that it had happened in front of their children, the video she'd been sent the next day by Nicholas's guilty aunt. Janice didn't gasp. She didn't dramatize. She nodded slowly, taking notes. "When did the financial changes begin?" she asked. Elaine gave dates. "When did documents start disappearing?" Janice asked. Elaine described the changed passwords and how household statements stopped arriving where they used to. She also mentioned the trustee letters Nicholas had never seen because, from the beginning, she had redirected those to herself. Janice set her pen down. "You did the right thing leaving," she said, "legally and as a mother. Now we document everything." That word document grounded Elaine. Janice explained the next steps carefully. Temporary custody protections, emergency orders, citing the violence in front of the children, financial discovery. And then she asked the question Elaine had been waiting for. "Do you want to understand where the money went?" Elaine nodded once. "Yes." The forensic accountant arrived a week later. Seth Gross, early 40s, quiet, precise, the kind of man who spoke only when necessary. He didn't ask about feelings. He asked for records, bank statements, credit reports, emails, statements from the trustee where Nicholas had signed off on things he barely read. Elaine provided what she had screenshots she had taken months ago without fully knowing why. Dates she had written down instinctively, transactions that didn't feel right even then. She handed him the leather folder too. Seth studied everything carefully. "This wasn't random," he said finally. "This was intentional." Elaine felt a small shift inside her chest, not relief, not anger. Confirmation. They worked methodically, no rush, no theatrics. They traced transfers that didn't match household expenses, found consulting fees that led straight to accounts controlled by Nicholas and indirectly by Marla. Noticed how access permissions inside the company had changed around the same time Marla started appearing everywhere. Patterns formed. Elaine watched the evidence stack grow, neat and undeniable. She didn't celebrate. She waited. At night, when the children slept on air mattresses in the small apartment she'd rented, Elaine sat alone with her thoughts. She replayed moments she had once brushed aside, the way Nicholas had flinched when she corrected him, the way Marla had spoken with such certainty about internal company decisions she shouldn't have known, the way silence had been used against Elaine as proof she didn't understand. She understood now. Silence was not surrender. Silence was observation, and observation, when paired with truth, became leverage. Elaine never posted online, never defended herself in group chats, never explained. She let Nicholas talk. Every lie was a gift. Weeks began to form a rhythm. School drop-offs, lawyer meetings, emails from the trustee confirming they had received Janice's letters. Quiet evenings with the children where they read instead of tiptoeing around their father's temper. One afternoon, Seth called. "I found something," he said simply. Elaine closed her eyes. "Everything?" she asked. "Yes," he said. "Everything." Elaine thanked him and ended the call. She sat very still after that. No shaking, no tears, just clarity. She opened the thin leather folder, the one that had followed her for years, and placed a single new document inside. At the top of the page was a date and a meeting time. Elaine closed the folder carefully, as if sealing something sacred. Because Nicholas Holland still believed he was standing on solid ground. He had no idea that beneath him, every support had already been removed. The floor wouldn't collapse loudly. It would simply refuse to hold him when the moment came. Elaine didn't fall apart. She dismantled. The work began before dawn most days, while the children still slept in the next room of the small apartment she'd rented on a month-to-month lease. Elaine sat at a cheap wooden desk, sleeves rolled up, hair pulled back, eyes steady. No dramatic revenge speeches. No obsession with Nicholas's social media. Just structure, just order, just truth. While Nicholas Holland celebrated his freedom, publicly posing with Marla at restaurants, tagging locations, soaking in comments about starting over. Elaine sat across from people who didn't care about feelings. They cared about facts. Her lawyer, Janice, spread documents across a conference table one morning. "Let's start with what we know for sure," Janice said. "Ownership." Elaine slid the thin leather folder across to her. Janice opened it and took her time. Inside were the trust agreements, the sealed custodian instructions, the original share certificates from Dickerson Freight, now operating under its modernized name, DF Logistics still listing the family trust as majority owner. "Your father was careful," Janice said quietly. Elaine nodded. "He knew I might need protection from someone I loved." Janice didn't flinch at that. "With these," Janice said, tapping the documents, "the board answers to the trust. And the trust answers to you. Nicholas is an employee with an executive title, not an owner." Elaine already knew that. Hearing someone else say, it still mattered. Seth, the forensic accountant, took longer. He worked from a separate office across town, sending only short emails for updates. "Need 3 more months of statements. Can you confirm this date? Did you authorize this transfer?" Elaine answered each question precisely. One afternoon, she sat with him in person. The table between them was covered in printed statements, highlighted entries, and spreadsheets. "This is what we've got," Seth said. "Company funds used to pay for flights that coincided with strategy retreats Nicholas took with Marla. Hotel stays coded as client development, luxury purchases marked as entertainment. A consulting entity set up in Marla's name, receiving steady monthly fees from DF Logistics for operational review, then transferring large portions out again within days. Was there any formal contract with her firm approved by the board?" Seth asked. "No," Elaine said. "I'd have seen it in the trustee reports." "Then this," Seth said, pointing to the pages, "is a problem. For him, not you." He turned his laptop around. Emails appeared on screen, internal messages pulled from Discovery once Janice formally requested access as majority owner's legal representative. Nicholas forwarding internal strategy documents to Marla's personal email. Marla replying with coaching lines. "Frame this as a temporary audit process. She won't understand the details. If she gets emotional, use that, say she's overwhelmed. People will believe it." Elaine read them silently. Her eyes didn't water. Her jaw just set a little tighter. Seth clicked to the next file. Internal notes Nicholas had written, assuming only friendly staff would ever see them. "Need to push Elaine out of decision-making. She's dead weight. Marla recommends separating finances so she can't interfere." The word dead weight was underlined in one draft. Nicholas had never said that to Elaine in an email. He'd saved it for spoken arguments. He'd kept it for places where he thought there would be no record. He was wrong. Seth sat back. "This is enough to demonstrate misuse of company funds and breach of fiduciary duty," he said, "especially with his title." Elaine nodded once. "Is it enough," she asked, "that the board won't just see me as a bitter ex-wife?" "Yes," Seth said simply, "because on paper, you're not just his ex-wife." He tapped the trust agreement. You're their controlling owner. At home, life settled into an odd rhythm. School drop-offs, lawyer meetings, budget grocery trips, cartoons on low volume in the evenings. The children stopped flinching when a man's voice got louder on TV. They started asking simple questions again, like which cereal to buy, instead of serious ones, like whether Daddy is mad. Elaine kept her answers age-appropriate. Daddy and I are making decisions with helpers, she would say. The helpers are making sure everyone is safe. At night, when the children slept, she opened the leather folder. She added new documents beside the old. Judge's temporary order, granting her primary care of the kids until the court made a final decision. Confirmation from the trustee recognizing her as instructing party. Email from company counsel acknowledging receipt of Janice's letter requesting an emergency board session. The board had agreed. They wanted to review concerns. They didn't know yet how much Elaine had or how much she was willing to show. One evening, Janice sat back after going through another stack of Seth's summaries. He's exposed, Janice said, professionally and financially. But I need to ask you this. What do you want from the company, specifically? Elaine thought for a moment. I don't need revenge, she said. I need clarity. I want him removed from a position where he can hurt other people with the same carelessness. And personally, Janice asked, I want custody secured, and whatever financial settlement reflects reality, not the story he's been telling. Janice nodded. We'll use the board meeting to address him as an executive, she said. The divorce court will see him as a husband and father. Our job is to make sure those two pictures match. Elaine exhaled slowly. That's what she had been doing all along. Matching pictures, lining up actions and consequences, turning silence into a record. The call came on a rainy Thursday. Seth's voice was calm. I've finished the reconstruction, he said. Every dollar that left the company without approval. Every payment to Marla's shell consultancy. Every personal expense disguised as business. It's all in the report the board will see. Elaine closed her eyes. Thank you, she said. After they hung up, she sat very still. Then she opened the leather folder. Tucked behind the trust documents was a new paper one Janice had drafted and she had signed 2 days earlier. A formal motion, as majority owner, to convene an executive review of Chief Operations Officer Nicholas Holland for breach of fiduciary duty. At the top were the date and time the board had agreed to meet. Elaine slid the motion to the front of the folder. Nicholas still thought the upcoming meeting was his moment to pitch expansion. He didn't know the agenda had changed. The company he bragged about like a trophy was about to show him whose name was actually carved into its foundation. And for the first time in years, Elaine felt something close to anticipation, not of his downfall, of finally stepping into the room that had always, quietly, been hers. Nicholas Holland woke up that morning convinced he had survived the worst of it. The house felt different, but in a way he liked quiet, controlled, stripped of drama. Elaine's presence no longer hung over every argument. The kid's absence, he told himself, was temporary, court stuff, nothing more. He stood in front of the mirror, straightening his tie, studying the man staring back at him. The faint lines around his eyes looked less like stress and more like experience, he decided. He had stories now. He'd spun them well. He had told anyone who would listen that Elaine had walked out irrationally, that she had never understood the pressure he was under, that she had tried to interfere with his company. He hinted that she had mental health issues, that she had become paranoid. He left out the parts about the slap. He left out the video. People believed the version they found easier to sit with. In the kitchen, Marla moved with the comfort of someone who had never paid for the space she occupied. She wore tailored pants and one of Elaine's old silk blouses, claimed, washed, and folded into her own drawers. She poured coffee into Elaine's mug without hesitation. After today, Marla said, sliding the mug toward him with a smile, this is all going to be behind us. Once the board hears your expansion plan, they'll know you're the future of DF Logistics. Nicholas liked the way she said you're. He picked up his folder, thick with charts, projections, buzzwords he'd practiced until they sounded like strategy. Executive review is just a formality, Marla added, smoothing his lapel. Someone probably complained about the restructuring, but the board needs you. I'll sit in, back you up if needed. He nodded. He liked thinking of the meeting that way. Formalities. Approvals. recognition, visibility equaled ownership. It always had, in his mind. The drive to the office felt ordinary. Traffic lights, buses, pedestrians, all moving through their own lives. Nicholas stayed on his phone almost the entire time, skimming congratulatory messages from friends and acquaintances who were still repeating his fresh start narrative. A notification from his lawyer sat unread. A message thread with Elaine's name had been silent for days. He scrolled past it. At the building entrance, Nicholas stepped through security with practiced ease. The guard nodded. The receptionist offered a neutral, "Good morning." Nothing felt off yet. He swiped his access card at the turnstile. The light flashed red. He frowned. Swiped again. Slower. Red. "Is there a glitch?" he asked, trying to laugh it off. The security guard checked the screen. "Your access level was adjusted overnight," he said. "You're still cleared to enter the building, but not executive floors without approval." Nicholas blinked. "Adjusted by who?" he demanded. "Corporate Security Administration," the guard said. "Probably tied to the executive review meeting." Marla stepped in smoothly. "This is ridiculous," she said with a short laugh. "We're literally going to the review that decides that access. Can you buzz us through? We're on the agenda." The guard hesitated, then picked up the phone. "Let me confirm," he said. Nicholas forced a smile, as if this were mildly annoying but beneath his concern. But he felt it a small crack, opening. At the elevator, his assistant greeted him on the executive floor with an expression that was too carefully neutral. "Conference room?" he asked, adjusting his tie. "The board requested the main boardroom," she said. "Access is restricted today." "Restricted how?" Marla cut in, heels clicking too loudly in the quiet hallway. The assistant swallowed. "Only board members and individuals listed on the amended agenda," she said. "I sent you the update, Mr. Holland." Nicholas pulled out his phone, opened his calendar. The meeting title was no longer Expansion Strategy. It read, Executive Review, COO Conduct and Governance. He hadn't noticed the subject change the night before. His jaw tightened. "Who amended it?" he asked. "I only see the instruction from corporate counsel," his assistant said. "And a note that the trust representative will be present." Nicholas frowned. "Which trust?" She looked at him, genuinely surprised. "The majority owner trust," she said. "The one that's always been on the cap table?" Marla's hand on his arm stiffened. Nicholas waved it off. "It's procedural," he said, more to himself than anyone. "They want their boxes ticked." He walked toward the boardroom. The door was closed. Through the glass, he could see board members filtering in, taking their seats. No one waved him in. No one signaled. His nameplate was still in front of an empty chair near the middle of the table, not at the head. He told himself that didn't matter. He reached for the handle. A security guard stepped smoothly into his path. "I'm sorry, Mr. Holland," the guard said quietly. "The instructions say to wait outside until you're called." Nicholas stared at him. "Called by who?" he asked. The guard glanced at the tablet in his hand. "Trust representative," he said. "Or the board chair." "Trust representative." Nicholas's chest tightened. For the first time, the word ownership flickered in his mind, not as something he had, but as something he might not. Behind him, Marla's phone buzzed. She checked the screen quickly. Her eyes narrowed, but this time, not in confidence. In caution. Inside the boardroom, the clock ticked to the hour. The meeting began. Without him. The hallway outside the boardroom had never felt long before. Today, it did. Nicholas stayed near the glass, pretending to scroll his phone, pretending not to care that he was the only executive still standing in the hallway instead of sitting at the table. He'd been on the other side of that glass so many times, striding in, cracking jokes, commanding the room with easy charm. Now he watched someone else take that walk. The door opened. The boardroom fell quiet. Elaine Connor stepped inside. Not as a guest, not as a spouse, not as an afterthought. She wore a tailored suit in a neutral shade, the kind that didn't ask for attention but naturally received it. Her hair was pulled back neatly. In her hand, as always, was the thin leather folder Nicholas had never bothered to ask much about. This time, the board members noticed it. She didn't glance toward the glass immediately. She walked straight to the head of the table, where the board chair usually sat. Today, the chair was angled slightly to the side, making room. The chair remained in the room. Nicholas did not. Elaine placed the folder on the polished wood, opened it calmly, and took a seat at the end of the table in the space reserved for the representative of the majority owner. No one questioned her. Corporate counsel simply nodded, as if they had been expecting her all along. Only then did she lift her gaze toward the hallway. For a brief moment, her eyes met Nicholas's through the glass. There was no gloating in them, no visible hatred, just distance, clarity, recognition not of who he was, but of where he no longer stood. Then she turned away. "Let's begin," the board chair said. The door closed. The sound was soft, final. Nicholas stared at his own faint reflection in the glass and at the silhouettes behind it. He saw documents being passed, a projection screen lighting up, faces leaning forward with focus. He couldn't hear the words, but he recognized the rhythm. He'd sat through enough reviews to know the difference between a casual briefing and a serious inquiry. This was the latter. Beside him, Marla's posture had changed. She was no longer standing like a partner. She had shifted, ever so slightly, closer to the exit. Her phone buzzed again. She glanced down, eyes scanning a short message quickly. Her face went pale. "What?" Nicholas snapped. She didn't answer. Inside, Elaine stood. Graphs appeared behind her, clean, simple visuals. Seth's work. From where he stood, Nicholas could see lines trending in directions he didn't like. One bar labeled Authorized Company Expenses ended far lower than another labeled Actual Outgoing Payments. His name appeared beneath several of the bars. So did Marla's. Nicholas pressed closer to the glass. He almost didn't hear the security guard approach. "I need you to step back from the door, sir," the guard said. Nicholas didn't move. "That's my meeting," he said through his teeth. The guard checked the tablet again. "According to this," he said, "it's the trust's meeting. You'll be invited in if and when they request your presence." If and when. Nicholas turned back toward the glass. Inside, Elaine pointed to a section of the screen. A board member asked a question. Elaine replied, turning a page in her folder, handing something to the board chair. Nicholas caught a glimpse of a still frame on the next slide. A frozen image of his own living room, Christmas lights in the background, wrapping paper on the floor, Marla's arm in mid-motion. His own face, visible and passive in the corner of the frame. His stomach dropped. He hadn't known the video existed. He hadn't known Elaine had it. Marla took a step away from him. "Where are you going?" he hissed. She gave a tight, brittle smile. "I need to make a call," she said. "My firm." "You don't have a firm," he snapped. She didn't deny it. She just kept walking. For the first time since she'd entered his life in that red dress, Marla moved in the opposite direction of whichever way Nicholas was looking. Inside, another slide flicked onto the screen. This time, he could read the title clearly through the glass. Executive Summary of Misuse of Company Funds, N. Holland, M. Gray. The board chair's expression hardened. Elaine didn't look toward the glass again. She was no longer reacting to Nicholas. She was addressing the people who actually controlled his professional fate. People who now understood that the quiet woman he dismissed as a burden had been the majority owner's voice all along. Nicholas felt something he hadn't allowed himself in years. Not anger, not indignation, fear, not of losing money, of losing the story he'd built about who he was. And for the first time, he understood what the red light on the badge reader that morning had really meant. He wasn't just temporarily locked out. He had already been removed from the room where decisions were made. He just hadn't realized it until now. The boardroom settled into that particular kind of quiet that felt almost heavy. Elaine stood at the end of the table, the leather folder open, pages lined up in a neat, deliberate order. "Thank you," she said, "for allowing me to present in my capacity as representative of the majority owner trust." A small, simple sentence. It rewrote years of assumption in a single breath. Some board members already knew the structure in theory. None of them had ever seen her exercise it like this. Elaine began with the trust itself. She explained clearly, without embellishment, how Aaron Dickerson had transferred controlling shares of Dickerson Freight, now DF Logistics, into the family trust. How the trust's voting rights had always been tied to detailed instructions she had signed. How, when Nicholas was hired, he had been brought in as an employee with a generous compensation package, but no equity ownership beyond a small performance-based grant. Confirmation documents appeared on the screen. Signatures, dates, the original trust deed, amendments that clarified her role after her father died. Company counsel verified each one aloud. For the record. Next came Seth's findings. Elaine didn't raise her voice. She didn't dramatize. She walked through the numbers, line by line. Here are legitimate business expenses, she said, indicating one column. And here is a pattern of charges that cannot be justified by company policy or board-approved executive perks. Trips with no client meetings attached. Restaurant bills in cities where no vendor or customer logged visits. Payments marked for consulting to an entity that had never been presented to the board for approval. As of the end of last quarter, Elaine continued, these unauthorized expenditures total this amount. The figure on the screen made two board members whistle under their breath. One cleared his throat, embarrassed. Corporate counsel looked like he'd swallowed something bitter. Elaine clicked to the next slide. So far, these charges point to poor judgment and breach of company policy, she said. What elevates this to breach of fiduciary duty is what came next. Emails appeared. Nicholas forwarding Marla internal financial spreadsheets. Marla advising him on how to hide certain expenses within larger budget categories. Call it audit variance. No one reads the breakdowns. If she pushes, say she's overwhelmed, and you're handling the hard stuff. One board member shifted in his chair. She in these messages refers to you? He asked. Elaine shook her head. In Nicholas's mind, yes, she said. In legal reality, it refers to the trust. To the controlling owner he thought could be talked around with emotion. She let that sit. Then she clicked to the video still. This, she said, voice still calm, is not a company expense. But it is relevant to character and to the integrity expected from an executive responsible for our people and our reputation. A staffer dimmed the lights as the short video played. The room watched, in silence, as Nicholas's living room appeared. Christmas lights, children, Marla in red, the slap, Elaine going to her knees. Nicholas standing still. Someone muttered, "My God." A board member's jaw tightened. Another closed his eyes briefly. Elaine spoke only once the screen went dark. I did not bring this to criminal court, she said. Yet, but I am not prepared to allow a man who condones violence against the mother of his children, in front of them, to continue representing this company as one of its public faces. No one argued. Through the glass, Nicholas couldn't hear the words. He didn't need to. He saw enough. He watched his own behavior, stripped of justification, played back without his commentary. He watched faces change when they saw him not as the storyteller, but as the subject. Earlier in the week, the board had questioned Nicholas privately, with counsel present. He'd been given the chance to explain the transfers, the invoices, the trips. He'd offered little beyond vague mentions of pressure and complaints about being misunderstood. No one in the room felt they needed to hear the same excuses again. When it was time to vote, the board chair's voice was formal. The motion on the table, he said, is immediate termination of Nicholas Holland from his position as Chief Operations Officer for breach of fiduciary duty, gross misuse of company funds, and conduct detrimental to the company's reputation, restitution, and legal recourse to follow the recommendations of counsel. Hands went up around the table. No one abstained. No one asked for more time. Elaine didn't smile. She simply closed the folder. Corporate counsel slid a prepared packet toward the chair. We've drafted the initial termination documents, counsel said. The trust sign-off is already included. Elaine picked up the pen, signed. For years she had watched Nicholas sign things he didn't bother to read. Now he would feel what it was like to have his future altered by a signature he didn't see coming. Later that day, in a smaller room, a quiet press briefing took place, not a spectacle, just a controlled release. Elaine stood at a podium, a plain backdrop behind her with the DF Logistics logo. She didn't attack Nicholas by name. The lawyers had made sure of that. But she didn't hide behind vague language either. Our company has completed a thorough internal review, she said. We found serious misuse of company funds and conduct inconsistent with our values from a senior executive. That executive is no longer with us. We are cooperating fully with any further review and have initiated steps to make the company whole. Questions came. Was this related to her personal life? Was she the same Elaine mentioned in rumors tied to a viral video? She kept her answers clean. My personal life has been in legal proceedings, she said. I will say only this: I left a situation that was not safe for my children. The internal review process looked at documented facts, not gossip. The company will not be run on anyone's narrative except the truth. When asked about her role, she did not downplay it. "I represent the controlling interest," she said. "I chose to be quiet for a long time because I thought stability required it. I was wrong. Stability requires accountability." She stepped away from the podium as calmly as she had approached it. No dramatic walk-off, just completion. The divorce finalized weeks later. Custody went to Elaine with clear, written conditions about Nicholas's access: supervised visits, adherence to a therapist-approved plan, zero tolerance for any form of intimidation. The judge had seen the same video the board had. Nicholas tried to call. Once. Then again. Voicemails piled up: apologies, reinterpretations, pleas, blame. "I was under pressure. She manipulated me. You've always known I lean on people too hard." Elaine saved one of the messages for her legal file. She didn't respond to any. Silence, finally, was no longer her shield. It was her boundary. Marla left Nicholas the same way she had entered Elaine's life. Quietly, quickly, without loyalty. There was no dramatic fight, no long letter about how he'd failed her. One morning, Nicholas woke to a house that felt wrong again, not because it was full of tension, but because it was empty in the wrong places. Her side of the bed was bare. Her toiletries gone from the bathroom. The closet space she'd claimed was half empty, hangers swinging slightly. On the kitchen counter, beside the half-emptied coffee bag, sat a short note. "I can't be tied to this. I have to think of my career." No signature, no apology. The consulting entity in her name was already in the process of being shut down under legal pressure. The board's lawyers had included her in their findings. Other companies she'd hoped to impress quietly cut off contact. Status had evaporated. So had she. Nicholas stared at the note, then at the walls. He checked his email. "Your severance is under review, pending restitution. Your access to the company portal has been permanently revoked. Please direct all further communication through your legal caption, representative." The word pending followed him everywhere now. Pending settlement. Pending payment plans. Pending decisions about what kind of supervised access he would have to the children whose Christmas he had shattered. The house, once a stage for his stories, had become an echo chamber. His own voice was the only one left in it. Across town, Elaine woke up to a different kind of quiet, the kind that didn't make her brace. Light filtered through the windows of her new living room, smaller than the old one, but fully hers. The children sat cross-legged on the rug, arguing in that harmless way siblings do about which ornaments should go where on the tree they were decorating. Their laughter was unguarded. It sounded like it had when they were younger, before they learned to scan their father's face for mood changes. Elaine leaned in the doorway, a warm mug in her hands, listening. This was what remained. Not the house, not the car, not the image Nicholas had tried to curate. Her children, her clarity, her name on the documents that actually mattered. At work, the company settled into its new shape. Elaine didn't suddenly start showing up in every internal memo. That wasn't who she was. She installed a professional CEO with a clean record and a steady temperament. She remained as chair of the board and trust representative, approving clear policies about executive expenses and conflict of interest disclosures. Staff who had once looked away in hallways now sent short messages. "I'm sorry I didn't say anything earlier. I should have believed the way you looked that night. Thank you for cleaning this up the right way." Elaine read them all. She replied to some with a simple, "Thank you. Let's do better going forward." She didn't waste energy punishing them for the fear that had kept them still. Their work now would say more than any apology. At home, the kids slept through the night more often than not. They still went to therapy. So did Elaine. Healing was not a switch, but slowly the house stopped carrying the weight of what had happened in the old one. One evening, as Elaine tucked them in, her daughter looked at her seriously. "Mom," she said softly, "you're not quiet like before." Elaine smiled. "I'm still quiet," she said, "just not invisible." On the next weekend, they unpacked a box labeled Christmas. Elaine hadn't realized she'd brought the simple glass ornament from the old house until she unwrapped it. She turned it in her hand. It caught the light and scattered it across the wall. Last year, that ornament had hung in a room where violence was excused and children were told not to make things worse. This year, it would hang in a place where no raised hand would ever be tolerated. She handed it to her son. "Where should this one go?" she asked. He pointed to a branch at the center of the tree. "Right there," he said, "so we can all see it." She nodded. He hung it carefully. The anniversary of that Christmas Eve came and went without fanfare. Elaine didn't mark the date on a calendar, but her body remembered. That morning, she stood in the living room for a moment, watching the tree glow softly. No shouting, no slammed doors, no careful calculation about who was in which mood. Just the rustle of wrapping paper, the smell of something baking in the oven, and the sound of her children bickering lightly over whose turn it was to open the next gift. She thought of the woman she had been, a woman who let others take credit, who believed silence could save love, who protected a man who would not lift a hand to protect her. That woman hadn't been foolish. She had been trusting. She had been learning. Now she was something else. Boundaried, steady, visible. Elaine turned off the overhead lights so only the tree lit the room. She didn't think about whether Nicholas was lonely in his larger, quieter house. She didn't waste energy wondering if Marla regretted anything. Those stories were no longer hers to track. What mattered was this: her children, asleep in rooms without fear. Her company, guided by people who understood that responsibility is not about volume. Her own reflection, which she could finally look at without wondering if she'd failed by staying too long or leaving too early. Silence, she knew now, could be surrender. But it could also be strategy, and once dignity was reclaimed, it didn't ask for anyone's permission to exist. Elaine picked up her mug, listened to her children's voices drifting from down the hall, and smiled. The past had finally stopped banging on the door. The future no longer needed to knock. I hope you enjoyed watching this story as much as I enjoyed creating it. If it moved you, like, share, and comment on the lessons you took from it. Let me know where you're watching from, and I'll see you in the next video.